boom, blows the arm off, and you're like, who's this guy? I want to be this guy. Like,
Yep.
what the fuck? And then he shows up with a sword, and you're just like, bro, why am I playing X? I want to play 0. And then Mega Man X3 shows up, and you're like, win for the players. And then
Yep.
X4 shows up, and you're like, real win for the players, because you can just pick 0 and just get it over with.
That's Mega Man X. Okay, so I played Mega Man X4 as my first. That was my first Mega Man game, I think.
Ooh,
ever.
damn. That's
And,
quality
like,
game.
Yeah, but also so fucking hard for a kid. Like I was like, like I played it like more recently, being like, oh, maybe when I was a kid it was just hard because I was a kid, and I was like, no, this game is legitimately really hard.
Well, to be fair, the 0 playthrough is harder.
Yeah.
So if you
definitely.
gravitated towards 0 and started with the 0 playthrough, like, you're in for a world of hurt.
Yep.
But it's so satisfying.
But he looks so cool. I'm like, oh, I have to play a 0. I'm like, he's with the sword.
Yeah.
And like
Sword of a
yeah,
Thousand
then
Truths, right?
more like a lightsaber.
I know nothing about Mega Man. So
He's got a
I'm just trying to be a troll.
lightsaber. He's basically got a lightsaber. The Z-saber. And you can get it as X and X3. But it just works the game and makes it so easy.
I figure, because if you have projectiles like that are power, like charge shot as X, and you have the sword, it's like, oh, okay.
The thing about the sword in X3 is that it launches a projectile forward that deals something like 16 damage, even on the last boss. And the sword itself deals 32. So if you can actually hit something with the sword, it's pretty much dead.
Nice.
It's like Hadoken level of Mega Man X1, but like worse because the projectile actually moves.
Yep, that's pretty awesome, actually. I definitely never was good at getting all the collectibles. Like I watched my friends get like Hadouken in X1, but like I never went for all the armor pieces or all the Dr. Wily things.
The first few times I beat the boss, like Sigma in X, I didn't have the helm piece and the armor piece because I just couldn't find them. I also didn't have all the hearts. But I eventually stumbled upon them accidentally all one by one. And for the most part, I was happy that most of the parts I was missing, I had the right indication of where to go. I just couldn't land the jumps or whatever.
Yeah, it's tricky platform, man. Like really punishing. Like you fall, you're toast.
They've really measured some of it to be like, if you don't nail the jump about as pixel perfect as you can get it, you won't get it. And I can certainly appreciate that.
Get good, scrub.
Yeah, basically.
Dan's gonna be another about 20 minutes.
That's
shit!
cool.
All right.
Because he's Dan. And
That's all right.
Jacob, have you played any of the Mega Man games? Like any of them at all? None of them.
No.
Ooh.
Holy shit, bro.
That's so far out of anywhere near what I gamed as a kid or at any point that, I wouldn't even.
Yeah,
know
I can understand.
Just listen to the soundtrack and you'll be into it. You listen to some of the music from X. Oh,
Mega Man goes more into like pop rock themes, and then you get to Mega Man X, and it's like rock and metal, and like it's so good.
The riffs. Oh man, the intro stage, that the stage select music is like my favorite. And X1 is like one of my favorite.
From X1, yeah.
And X4 too, actually.
For me, for X, like Mega Man X Classic, my favorite track would be the intro stage.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so awesome. And then you get to X2, and X2 is a little tamer in comparison. It went a little smoother, but the Centipede was a good track. The B was a good track. What bosses are even in X3? Oh wait, the B was the boss of X3. The B, for me, it's the other way around. I've played more of X3 than X2, so I remember X3 a little more. Oh man, the acid seahorse, toxic seahorse, I think his name was, is dope. Like, so good. And obviously all of the last boss tracks, like those are exempted from having to be put in top 10 tracks because they're all fucking badass.
Yeah, I honestly...
Mega Man X5 last track is just like, you can play that forever.
X5, honestly, is one of the most confusing games I've ever played.
X5 is bad. Storytelling-wise, it's bad. It's a good Mega Man game, but the story's garbage.
I got... Like, the first time I played it, I wanted to, like... when I play games, I sometimes try to test the boundaries of what it'll let me do. So it's like, yeah, we're gonna like you choose when we go to. I forget what you have to even do. You're like
You
we have a
fire the
countdown.
cannon or the shuttle, and you have a countdown to do it. Otherwise,
you
they'll
for
force
walking
the
with
cannon to
I'm glad for
the
the
fire, and if you fail again, they'll force the shuttle to launch. And if you fail that again, well, you lose 0. But like,
Yes?
there's a good chance
What
you'll
about
lose 0 anyways, so you have nothing to gain.
I see. I didn't get that. I was like, well, let me just launch now. So I did. And it's like, okay, you failed. Like, do it again. I'm like, yeah, let's see. I wanted to see if it would give me a game over, but instead of giving me a game over, I just got like, it set me off like a separate path in the game. It's like, okay, well now you have to like go rescue someone. I got like this whole other level.
You've realized
started playing.
Yeah, you get forced right away into Gates Laboratory.
Is that the last part of the game?
Gates Laboratory, pretty much. Wow, that actually means that the gunfire succeeded. It all depends on whether or not you succeed on the gunfire. Because if you succeed on the gun, which even getting all the parts is a really low chance of working, and I hate the new collector's edition that they published because there's an achievement for getting the gun to work and it's 100% RNG. But yeah,
I got that out of luck.
You got that out of luck, and then you get forced pretty much in the end game like right away.
Holy
you can
shit,
still
yeah.
do the other bosses, but you get rushed to the end game like right away.
Okay, I thought I was so confused. I was like, I didn't even beat I beat maybe one level. And I was like, okay, you're at the end now, and I was like, I didn't even know it was the end. I thought it was like a weird game over state that made me play like a.
Technically speaking, a perfect any percent speedrun of that game would fire the shot first chance he gets, get it right, do the last bit, and then get out of there, which is like ridiculously low odds of happening.
I actually play it on not the new collection, but I have the GameCube collection.
Oh, I love that collection with the Mega Man race game.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I played a lot of that collection, so I know it very well.
It's funny because like when I was really young, like before I even had any game consoles, I used to play like Mega Man X at I took piano lessons, and my teacher, whenever I was waiting, she had like a Super Nintendo with Mega Man X.
So cool.
So that's how I used to. That's how I found out about Mega Man X. And X4, I think I borrowed a PS1. Like I rented it from Blockbuster, the X4, and then eventually I found out that they made a Mega Man anniversary, like Mega Man's 1 through 8, not X, just regular.
Yeah.
And when I got a GameCube, I bought that as one of my first games, and I was playing through all the Mega Man games. And then they're like, oh, and they're making an X collection, and I was like, I need that.
As soon as they announced, I was like, yes.
Does not make it disappear.
I was like 11. I was like, I've lived my whole life just waiting for Mega Man X collection.
Let us go.
Man, was I stoked when that came out. It felt like I was cheating. I was like, because Mega Man X4 and 5 and 6 were like full release games one generation before that, and now I'm getting like X1, X2, X3, X4, X5, X6, and a racing game. I'm like, how is this legal? I feel like I robbed them. It was like $50. Like X4 was like $50 at the time, or $40. So I was like, okay, like down. I even had the RPG. I have Mega Man X Command Mission.
Wow, I don't even think I've played that.
It's weird. It's just like
I would imagine. Like I've played Battle Network a little bit.
I have that one as well, actually. Well, I have Network Transmission actually, which is the side-scrolling shooter version of the Network games.
Oh no, I had the old school Network with the cards.
The Game Boy ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many of those. Holy crap! There's like, they were like Pokemon, but like they release way more frequently than Pokemon games.
Pokemon.
Sorry, I'll try and change tracks a little bit just because Jacob. I'm sorry. Like hardcore Mega Man. I'm like facing my collection right now. I'm like staring straight at my Mega Man games. So like, I'll change my eye line to something that we would all agree. Oh yeah, we've all played the Fatal Frame series, so we can discuss that, right?
I haven't played Fatal Frames. I know a lot about Fatal Frames, but I've never played Fatal Frames.
No, I'm just kidding. I have them, and I haven't even finished the first one, so I can't even speak
I had
to
a
that.
class on horror video games, so I know more about them than I've played them.
That sounds like a fantastic class. I love horror games, so I would love to take
I can imagine. I mean, the teacher, I don't like them personally, but the teacher did a very good job of communicating passion.
Nice.
So I was happy in regardless. It was an interesting delve.
I'm sure you talked a lot about Silent Hill.
Silent Hill got spoken of a bunch. Resident Evil got spoken of a bunch.
Of course.
I had to do a 10-page paper on Clock Tower, the original Clock Tower on PlayStation.
Yeah, Clock. I've actually recently played the translated version of the import on the Super Nintendo, the Japanese one. Yeah, it's if you thought it looked janky on PS1, it's
Oh, it was
even
jank.
jankier. Yeah,
It was jank. It felt like watching a slasher movie, but where you're the hero.
it's exactly like that. I played like I was playing it like earlier this year actually, the Clock Tower Super Nintendo one. It's super weird playing a survival horror. It's like one of the first survival horror console games, so it's like yeah, it's just like I don't know what rules apply. Like sometimes I'll just go into a room and I'll like investigate something. And it's like, oh no, now that the scissor guy is there, you're toast. I'm like, okay, well that's not really fair. Like I didn't know he was gonna pop out of like the flower pot. So
yeah, in the PlayStation version, I think you get like 3 chances to fight him off and get running, and then you game over if you can't fight him off again.
Yeah, I didn't understand. I thought that like I was pressing something.
Me neither. I realized you could do that like halfway through the game. And I was like, wait, you can fight him off? Well, that's hours of my life I'm not getting back.
Yeah, thankfully I'm playing on an emulator, so I could just save state and like.
Yeah.
That never happened.
Save summer.
Oh yeah, like if I'm playing on an
I'm
emulator,
guilty of it too. Don't worry.
On an
Especially when I get
playing...
frustrated at a game, it's just like, oh well, that's the save scumming begins.
Yeah, stealth games also are, for example, like are something where I will probably save scum. Like I'm like, no, I stealth this mission perfectly.
I love stealth games, but I never managed to stay hidden.
Sometimes I find it like it's like sometimes it feels like trial and error. Like I would never have known like there was a guard there unless I like was able to see him
the first time.
Yeah, and sometimes like even if you did everything perfectly, like you might just be unlucky and you miss something. Like the guard was at the wrong spot at the wrong time, so you didn't see him because he was blocked by like level blocking, and then you run into him and like, okay, well now I'm seen, and like, okay, restart. Like if you're playing a game with like serious kind of like cause and effect for stealth, like Far Cry, if I get seen, that's why I love Far Cry. It's like, okay, fine, I'll just shoot everybody. But in a game where or Cyberpunk, but in games where like stealth has like severe consequences, like Deus Ex, Dishonored, like things where like stealth matters, it feels more frustrating. I don't know. Or Metal Gear Solid also. It's just like, okay, well I have to stay hidden, otherwise this mission will be forever changed. Hey, Jacob, you're playing a lot of Dragon Age these days. What's going on?
Well, it's a great game, and it's been a while since I played it, and I was like, I should play it, and so I am.
What are you?
Well, it's actually I just restarted. Like initially, I pulled out my old 360 and was playing it on that just for the simplicity of a console setup. But then I got a little bored with the kind of class I was playing, and I was like, well, if I'm gonna restart, we might as well put in the effort to mod up, because the thing with it on PC is like if you don't have a mod and you have a 4K monitor, you either going to have a blurry game or a completely unusable UI. And like I had trouble modding it at first
because everything was so small.
Yeah, like all the task bar, like action bars and the menus and everything are just tiny by default because wasn't built with 4K in mind. But if I put it down to like 2K, it's like noticeably blurry and like not sharp, and I was just like, this sucks. And so initially I was like, I don't feel like modding it, so I just busted out my Xbox version, and then I was like, well, I kind of want to make a new character, so let's try to mod it up, and a bit of trial and error later, and I managed to get it working. And so now I'm playing I'm going to play a mage because it's what I do. And
yeah, me too, don't worry.
I'm gonna go with I don't know how I remember the game, but they have like the subclasses you can choose from, and I'm gonna go with the Arcane Warrior. So basically, battle mage with a focus on lightning attacks.
Nice, very cool.
I'm basically an armored Palpatine.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Dragon Age is the only game I can remember where I almost always played as the wizard, and it's the only one where I played as a warrior, which is I was trying to experiment and be like, oh, I wonder what the warrior class is like for once in my life, and I played as human, very very boring human soldier kind of. It was kind of fun still though. Like it added some balance. Like I was like, okay, I have my warrior, I have Morgan or whatever her name is.
Morgan.
Morgan, yeah, Morgan, and Liana. I actually I played this for class. Like I remember I did a project on Dragon Age. That's what I was doing at the time. Yeah, I learned a lot. Like, 'cause I wanted to play Dragon Age so bad. It was one of those games like I really wanted to play, but I didn't have the motivation. So I was like, this will force me to play it, and I loved it. But I was like, I need to force myself because otherwise I'm going to get distracted. And it worked. And Dragon Age is really really fun. It's a good game.
Yep.
Lots of great dialogue, cool characters,
lots of choice and consequence. Actual origin stories with actual impact. Looking at you, CD Projekt Red.
I thought they were looking at Mass Effect, but yeah.
Well, Mass Effect didn't try with proper origin stories, but choice and consequence. Yeah, looking at you, Mass Effect, but also
CD Projekt Red.
But also you, CD Projekt. Okay. You were my favorite, and then you broke my heart. It's okay.
Well, there's a patch coming out
today. You were supposed to be
there's
the one.
Like a 30 gigabyte patch.
Oh fuck! Really?
Yeah, like literally hundreds upon hundreds of bug fixes and other little things like that. I was looking through some of the changelog, and like most of it was shit I never had encountered. So I'm like, okay, that's whatever. Yeah, it's just like basically a small game-sized bug fix for the game.
God damn! I mean, great. Maybe I'll play it again in a year when this happens multiple times because like I did everything, man. Like I don't want to replay the whole game. I mean, unless there's like added quest lines, and then I can actually experience what they've changed. I feel like the game's gonna feel super different. Whenever I go back to it, it'll be like, whoa, like I want that feeling. I want that feeling to be like, wow, they actually like they did a good job here.
Did something with it.
Well, yeah, it's like I played the alpha or something.
Yeah. Or the pre-alpha beta. Whatever the earliest playable iteration of a game is, that's what we played.
Alpha.
Yeah.
You usually have to be in the know to get access to a game that's alpha, but alpha.
Unless the company advertises it as a complete game, but it's still alpha. That's
yeah, welcome to the forest.
Yeah.
The game was completable, so I mean, at least it was that, but it did have its bugs.
Hello, Daniel. Have a Dan.
Gentlemen, how is everyone?
We're doing great until you were 25 minutes late. Get out!
Oh, no. Jeez!
You have officially been kicked off the podcast.
One and done. Hey, that's brutal. That's brutal. Brutal but fair. Okay, guys, have fun. So what's up? How's everyone doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad, man.
Cool. Yeah, sorry for being late. I the tax person that I sent all my things to was like, "Hey, you're missing like 3 documents." I'm like, "Why? Why do I have to miss 3 documents?" So I had to run around and do all that loveliness today. But I'm here and just enjoying a lovely outside. So yeah. So Bethesdacast today. That's the judge.
That was the intent.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Jacob, do you got like questions or things, or is this going to kind of be like a bit of an open broadcast again?
I can start us off, and then we'll see where
it's usually the way it goes, where we have a starting question, and then we just go off, and then
and then it just turns into 8,000 other questions. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. And
cool.
But yeah,
you're streaming again, obviously.
Yes, I am. I'm gonna stream some Oblivion because Bethesdacast.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was contemplating downloading it last night, but I figured, Jacob's got an Oblivion downloaded. Yeah. Is it vanilla, or do you have it modded?
It's vanilla.
Oh wow, really? Okay, interesting.
I know that there are a lot of mods for Oblivion. I just don't know that there's a lot of interesting stuff like there is for Skyrim.
I mean, there's like the immersive weapons and armor and stuff, like all the regular
graphics, but
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot. I think it's less that Skyrim has more interesting mods and more that Skyrim just needs more mods to be as interesting.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Again, no, not trying to attack Skyrim at all, but Oblivion has things that you need mods to get it in Skyrim. So.
I've played too many hours of vanilla Skyrim to pretend like I didn't like it.
Yeah.
But I've played too many hours of modded Skyrim to pretend like there wasn't room for improvement.
Yeah. I've also played too many hours of modded Skyrim to know I will never play unmodded Skyrim.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I am willing to play unmodded Oblivion and certainly unmodded Morrowind again.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least, minor mods to just quality of life stuff. But as far as overhauling the game, that's Skyrim's domain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is kind of a shame, because I feel like it'd be so nice to have like a Switch version of Skyrim that I could just port around on the go, like try new builds out. But yeah, if it's just the vanilla experience, what's the point? I've seen the sun, and I can no longer return to the darkness.
Indeed.
Oh man, my Skyrim's barely modded, so I feel like
Yeah, mine too. There's only like 200 or 300 mods active at once.
Yeah,
give or take,
If you've got less than 1,000 mods, I don't want to talk to you.
I have like 5, and only one of them is like visual, and it's to fix the tree stump in like Rivden or something.
Oh wow!
Wow.
That's a very specific mod.
Yeah, it was bothering me. I'm like, why is this tree stump purple? I'm like,
This is wrong.
They made a mod to fix that. That's my only visual mod. The rest is like, I think there's a space core somewhere. That's it.
Wow. That's funny.
To each their own.
I do want lightsabers though. What am I kidding? I want lightsabers and Lord of the Rings weapons.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want lightsabers in anything,
Right? Isn't there like a full Lord of the Rings Fellowship mod for Skyrim, where like it gives you the whole 9-person party?
I'm not looking at it, but probably. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a mod that completely remakes the map into Game of Thrones.
Holy
Oh
shit.
yeah, with yeah, that's true. I recall
That's
that.
awesome.
So like, Windhome is now Winterfell, and like
Oh my
Mhm.
god.
is King's Landings and stuff.
Yeah, honestly, it's kind of it's almost too eerie if like you have that knowledge and you look at just like the placements and the city structure and whatnot of these towns. And it's like, oh well, look at that. They do kind of already have a little bit of Game of Thrones in them. Yeah, because the High King of Skyrim chilled in solitude, right? That was the whole, I mean, the High Queen by the time the game starts, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the keep.
Yeah, just like the Red Keep, exactly. Yeah.
No, the game
interesting.
starts with Stormcloak holding the throne.
No.
Yeah.
No. I don't. No, not at all. That's
In
false.
Solitude, pretty sure, yeah.
No,
No.
Solitude is always the bastion of the Empire.
It was Elisif's husband who was the king. I think it was King Torrig at the time. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
But it was
wait,
the
yeah.
Stormcloak who went and challenged him, then literally exploded him by Ulfric. Yeah,
Ulfric Stormcloak.
yeah. He came around, yelled at the guy until he exploded, and then claimed the king for his own. And the Imperials were like,
He's in the wagon with you, isn't he? Ulfric Stormcloak with like the
Yeah.
Yeah, he's there with you in the
yeah,
beginning. You
yeah.
help him
He's fresh
escape.
from being Kingslayer, basically.
Yeah. He was gonna die.
But then where does he go to hang out if he's not in Solitude?
Windhelm.
Oh,
Yeah, he's the Jarl
I
of
never go
Windhelm.
to Solitude, so I never remember what's there. Solitude is like the biggest piece of shit, like useless location in Skyrim. Unless you do the Bard's
I wish
College,
they were-
it's useless.
Well, I've never done the
never
Bard's
go there.
College. Never done the Bard's
It's not
College. The only
really-
times
It's
I've
an
gone
easy
there
way to
is-
get. It's an easy way to get a skill up in some of the social skills.
Yeah, but I feel like I'd rather do that later in the game when it's harder to grind skills.
That's what I mean. That's usually why I never did
Exactly.
it, because I never
Yeah.
got use for it.
hmm
Wow, who's like grinding on fucking blackboards?
Thought someone
that
was fucking
me?
street racing.
There's a truck outside my house. See that?
Oh,
Yeah,
that'll do it.
I recognize the brakes now and the engine.
Yeah.
The heavyweight.
Oh,
beast
yeah.
engine.
Oh yeah, the brakes.
I'm
Oh,
sorry,
sexy.
guys. I can turn off
That's
my
alright.
mic for 1 second.
Oh no,
Sorry,
no
sorry.
worries.
We haven't even like officially
We haven't
started yet, so
started,
it's
so-
okay. We're just pre-gaming basically.
It's only gonna get louder. I'm just gonna pause it for 1 second. My mic.
No.
Okay, we're good. It's gone.
Fuck, I hope Herobrine's back today.
Oh yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
He's gonna suggest to us like 10 mods to turn everyone purple or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, the big difference being that with Oblivion, we don't really need to be told that there are cool mods if you kind of know.
True.
Yeah.
Hmm. Do I have Twitch on? I do
What?
have Twitch here. Jacob, are you actively streaming right now?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, I gotta update. Okay, hang on. I mean, like, don't wait for me, but yeah, I will be joining your stream in a second.
Just filling this imp with arrows.
Good.
Dying. No, I have no magic. That's just...
I remember Oblivion being a lot harder than Skyrim. Like I had a lot harder,
It
a lot faster.
Yeah.
Skyrim,
That's right.
Skyrim did everything it had to do to get the casuals on board.
It worked.
They
Really well.
simplified
sold so much.
everything. They removed a lot of the bulk that made the game interesting in favor of making it accessible. And if it worked well in terms of selling numbers of copies, it also meant that for more hardcore gamers like us, the game gets a little stale.
Yeah.
Well, definitely. A lot of reused assets can do that, but I think that if we're looking at how much sheer profit, like you said, like sheer profit wise, like Skyrim is like, wow, they really hit the ball out of the park.
Skyrim sold copies on just about everything it could run on, including your Alexa speaker. Like,
Yeah, that was pretty intense. I'd like to play, quote
I would
unquote,
like
play
to
an
give it an
iteration of
honest
that.
try. I would like to give it an honest try.
To me, that's just a fucking digital DM right there.
Yeah,
In the
I mean,
Skyrim
I just
settings,
don't know what kind of level of jank to expect from the AI having trouble interpreting what you ask of it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess
But-
it's about as accurate as the AI dungeon master or whatever. Like,
Oh boy.
I guess.
you know what I'm talking about, right? Like,
I
it's
know
that program.
perfectly well what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I just tried it for the first time after you guys mentioned it. Like after our podcast,
Oh, really?
I played it.
It's weird.
It's something. Oh yeah. Yeah, it'll surprise you.
I was like, I tried to make it. I tried to confuse it because like there was a guy. There was like some sort of demon invasion, and I was like, this guy's telling me about a strike, and I was like, okay. I'm like, I say thank you for the information, and then give him a little kiss on the cheek. He's like, and it's like he's like, hey, you want to see my house? I'm like, show me your house, and he's like, this is a whistle. I'm like, show me the whistle. And then it's like you hear piercing screams in your ears. I'm like, break the whistle.
Break the whistle.
And it's like, and then I say like, thanks for the info, baby. And he's like, I'm on strike. I'm like, okay, you know what, this isn't.
Yeah, it stopped responding. Yeah.
Yeah, it was getting a bit too wild for me, but I thought it was hilarious. Some of the stuff that like was because it didn't know how to interpret some of the weird shit I was asking of it, so it would like this. It's just the fact that I went to his house and I was like, explore his kitchen, and it's like there is all sorts of food here. Like it has to like. Have all this information ready of like what does this guy's house look like? This random NPC. Let me go to his house and explore his house.
That's it. Yeah, I feel like it has to be linked to certain keywords. Like his kitchen is probably like this whole thing. Like okay, they assume theoretically that you're either looking at, exploring, etc., etc. So here's this paragraph. It would be really interesting in seeing the. Yeah.
What it does is that it parses the statement, so it looks for like words of action, and then what are the modifiers, like who's interacting with what, and then it tries to construct a scheme of what's happening, and then generates an answer, and then corrects the grammar.
Does a good job. Honestly, all things
it does a good job. Yeah,
pretty incredible stuff.
I'd say, yeah.
Are you fighting a vampire, Jacob?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Just careful with vampirism.
But he's doing something to me.
Is it your sword that's magic?
Oh yeah, it's probably my
sword. Yeah, you're doing it to him. Yeah. Are you a vampire, Jacob?
No. That was what ruined the game for me, actually. It's what made me quit Oblivion. It's because of vampirism.
Absorbs fatigue, nice.
Yeah.
Blackwater blade. Yeah, you're draining his stamina.
He tried to hit me and he fell. Loser.
Oh man, this is making me want to play again, but I know I can't because I just know.
It's just it's the start down the slippery slope, and it's a slope that usually ends around the same way. Oh, I want to start a new character. I want to do two hands or mage or something, and then oh look at that, I'm sneaky archer. I'm bored of this now. Uninstall. Play a Fallout game, rinse and repeat, and you just bounce back between those two, and that's how Bethesda has survived as a company this far.
Last time I tried to play Oblivion is that I installed Oblivion, played for 15 minutes, but then I was like, is Skyrim still installed? And it was. And do I still have some mods installed? And I did. And I'm like, well.
The work's
and then
already
I played
done.
for another 15 minutes, and I'm like, maybe what I wanted to play actually was Fallout. So then I get to Fallout, and it's like, no, it wasn't Fallout.
Yeah,
I
and you
tried
play
to
New
mod it a
Vegas for a
little
bit.
bit.
This is great. Yeah.
The truth is, you had no idea what you wanted to play. Nothing.
The truth is, I'm just bored and like.
Yeah.
Actually, the truth is, the game was rigged from the start, baby.
Yeah.
Then bam, I shoot you. Then someone shoots you in the head, and you got to go through the desert and find them in a casino.
Nice. For the best Bethesda game Bethesda didn't make.
Yeah, that Bethesda never made. Like, oh my god, the ultimate irony. I swear to God.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that goes to show that as a developer, their strength is not necessarily in crafting the games, but the assets for it.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, shall we kick off a proper start to this?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it.
Okay, so I figure.
I mean, if Dan can get back to a microphone, that makes some sense.
Sooner than later. I'll be right there.
You're so late, Dad, causing all these troubles.
I
killed
know.
Octavius last week.
And you came close.
I did.
I mean, is the audio really that bad? Because then I'll expedite the process.
I mean, I'll put it to you like this: if you were trying to watch a professional podcast and it sounded like that, you would probably stop watching it.
I guess that's
Probably.
fair. All right, cool.
Compared to what's out there, you know, like.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, be right
If
in.
you want to compete with the greats, you gotta fake greatness until you actually are.
That's why I'm wearing my headset, but not using the mic at my headset, but using the good mic.
You gotta make it obvious you're not using it by like tilting it away from your face as much as possible.
It's an illusion.
Well, it's retracted. I can pull it out when I'm using it. I just pull it back and.
Is that SteelSeries?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Wireless, the whole 9 yards. It's great. I love it. I got like, $250 headset, $250 speakers. My audio setup is pristine.
Honestly, a very underrated, in my opinion, very underrated aspect of enjoying games is like having great audio, like surround, like virtual surround. Maybe not virtual surround, but like when you can have a clear indication of, like having a sense of where things are in relation to your character by using your headset is like. Honestly, the first time I ever did it was, I think, on Mass Effect, where I started using good headphones with games, and I was like, whoa, like, the bass and everything. You really get a much better feeling of the environment. I love using headphones with games.
Yeah, the first time I got a good headphone set, I had the perfect game to really, make use of how good they can be. That was when I was playing Battlefield 3. And I don't know if you've played much Battlefield, but above all other things, the sound design in that game is unfucking real. Like, I could hear the crackling of the dust settling after a grenade went off, and I was just like, okay. I'm probably going to die a lot, but I'm going to hear it coming every time.
It is definitely considered. I've looked, because I always want to test out my audios, like with my new headsets or whatever, and I'm like, okay, what should I what should I play to test it out? And Battlefield is one of the most common suggestions. And honestly, even the older ones, like like Bad Company 2, like you play it and you're like, holy shit, yeah. Like, I played Battlefield 1 and with just a like the single player or whatever with a headset, and I was like, god damn, like the sound is so crisp and clear. It's beautiful.
Yeah, no, you hear every bullet. It's crazy. They really went all out for the sound design for those games.
One thing that
as well.
One thing that visually incredibly stunning. But one thing that I'm excited about, that I have to say, like I could already see that this might be where things are headed. I plugged in my DualSense, my PS5 controller, into my computer to try out, like to see if it worked with my Unreal Engine, like with the level I was making. And so it didn't work. I couldn't control anything because the controller wasn't like Unreal Engine did not recognize the DualSense controller.
That's weird.
But it did recognize one thing, and this is what blew my mind.
The resistive trigger?
No. That's what I thought might happen, but no, it did as I didn't set up anything for the DualSense. But what it started to do is it adapted the audio to the vibration. So basically when I would fire a gun using like my mouse and keyboard, the vibration of the sound effect of the gunfire was mimicked by the vibration. Like very, very precisely. So like the sound, like I know what the sound felt like basically. Like so if you let it do its own thing, adapt it itself, it will take any loud sound effects like explosions, and it can create the reverberations in your hands.
So you feel the
the audio is completely adapted to the sound, to the vibrations, like very precise vibrations, not just like rumble pack. It's like like, you know, when you see a sound wave, like you see the frequency and the amplitude, you could tell like the larger the wave, like the more intense the vibration, and like it slows down afterwards. Like there's like a reverberation afterwards. It made me realize, like, oh man, if that's where they're headed, like if they make it so that the DualSense is compatible with most games, like if Steam just has that like sort of patch that allows for the reaction of sound effects in the DualSense, we could have like all our games just like the AI decides what the vibrations will feel like based off of the sound effects, and oh my god, potential is wild. I think to feel the audio, not just to hear it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of.
That's why I have a giant subwoofer with my speakers, so the whole house is my audio.
So you can feel the thumping of the bass.
Yeah, that's one way of doing it too. You can do it that way.
Hope your neighbors enjoy.
Vibration.
Well, they
Hello.
haven't complained yet, so.
Okay, so I think my audio is a real person's again.
Definitely much better.
Fantastic. All right, set up on the stream. Bada bing, bada boom. Jacob, you going down the well, or what's up?
I would if I could, but it's closed.
Oh, it's closed.
No,
eh?
it's just being Spider-Man.
Yeah, I'm just jumping around. I tried to get on that roof there, but I found a roof that I think the game doesn't want you to go on.
Really? You sure your fucking boots are not springy enough?
I'll show you what I did.
Yeah, the boots are spring heel jack. Oh, I see.
I mean, so far everything's legit. Oh, I see where this is going.
No, I missed. But I made it there last time, and I couldn't go up. I was just stuck at the... Oh, I died.
Fall down.
Oh, now you can try again. There you
At
go.
least there's an autosave every time you open a door.
Yeah. Oops, that's the wrong one.
And that's why I could never do a hardcore run of a Bethesda game.
Because fall damage?
Because, I mean, not even fall damage necessarily, just like random Bethesda jank, you know?
For me, it's
You
just
may
because
just
I'm
start
reckless
randomly.
when I play those games.
Like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, while I try to recreate a jump I maybe can never do again, let's start the discussion off by starting as you should at the beginning. So, if anyone wants to tell us about their introduction to Bethesda Game Studio, also just so we're on the same page, for this podcast, we're talking pretty much exclusively about Bethesda Game Studios, so we're not going to really talk about their publishing stuff and like
Games like Doom are off the table.
Yeah, exactly.
Dishonored,
This is about Todd Howard and team, and basically the Elder Scrolls Fallout, and then we'll definitely talk a bit about Starfield at some point. But yeah, so this is just about Bethesda Game Studios, not Bethesda at large. And so whoever wants to lead us off can tell us simply what was your first Bethesda game, what was your overall introduction into Bethesda games, and yeah, basically your Bethesda origin story. If anyone wants to
For me, it was certainly in high school, because I remember the guy you recommended to me was a guy in my math class. But yeah, it was Morrowind Game of the Year edition that came with both expansions on Xbox.
Nice.
And I played that for, I mean, probably not as much as any of the other ones that came after, but certainly enough to say that when Oblivion was announced and eventually released, I played like only that for like a solid year. Oh man, I never get tired of that ragdolling. People bending over backwards. But yeah, I mean, it was Morrowind, and Morrowind has its intricacies that make it a little hard to get into at first. But once you get past that beginning hump, then it's a good game. It's a very good game. And it paved the way for me to both enjoy and hate myself a lot.
All right. Well, for me, I think you're probably going the furthest back as far as your Bethesda birth story. Because while I've definitely played plenty of Morrowind, in the past, I didn't play it at launch. I was actually a relatively late bloomer to Bethesda games, because I only I knew of Oblivion as a game, and it was coming out. Because I mean, how could you not?
Yeah.
And I dabbled with it here and there, but never got super into it. And then about a year actually probably less, before Skyrim came out. There was obviously a ginormous Skyrim hype train barreling through the industry, and little did we know it was not hyped enough, apparently.
I'm the
and
shepherd.
so that caught my interest, and I was like, I think I'm going to want to play this Skyrim game. I doubt it'll define me as a human being, but I'll just play it for a little bit.
Oh boy!
Don't take me down a path I can never fucking turn away from.
Yeah.
This is not crack cocaine. What are you talking about?
His books, I reckon, over in the Priory House.
But even though with Bethesda games, it's not really like you need to play all the games to keep up with the story. It's not like that. But I still played and play games like that.
If he's not,
so I wanted to at least play a bit of Oblivion before Skyrim, and so that's where it started. I picked up Oblivion on my 360. At this point, it was probably like a month or two maybe before Skyrim came out, and I just more or less blitzed the main story. I beat it in 20 hours.
Anyone looking for work should consider the Fighters Guild.
And then Skyrim came out, and as they say, the rest is history.
What's the news from the other parts of Tamriel?
Actually,
Nothing I'd like to talk
did I
about.
play Fallout before? I probably played Fallout 3 actually a bit before that.
See, that's kind of what I'm having a bit of trouble remembering, because I know that I played them very much around the same time, but it's like that chicken and the egg thing. Like, I don't know if I heard about Oblivion first and then subsequently heard about Fallout, or if I started playing Fallout first and then started playing Oblivion. I just remember being in high school and just playing a absolute shit ton of it. It was ridiculous. I think it was really Fallout 3 that made me kind of fall in love with the series more than anything. Oblivion was great, but like even back in the day, I felt the jank, as I'm sure many other players did, just it naturally being the case. But I don't know, something about the Fallout world was always far more charming. Maybe it was the soundtrack, which did an excellent job at portraying like the atmosphere like right away. Like there was just like you knew exactly what you were getting into, and yet nothing about it because like it's this radioactive world with two-headed cows and robots and all kinds of and death claws and fucking death claws, man.
And
like
super mutants.
Jesus, like it was an experience in itself, and like I will forever remember Fallout 3 as just being a masterpiece. Though obviously held up to certain standards today, it might look a little jank, but hey, whatever. Bethesda was great for a time. That was my introduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What next?
On my end, it's actually, I guess, there's a lot of similarities to yours, Dan. Because I was actually, I remember very clearly, I was like just started high school, and I just got my gaming PC, and I had just heard about Oblivion. So it was like a lot of that stuff happening at the same time. And I looked at what Oblivion was, and I was like, oh my god, like it's incredible. There's so much going on in this game. I was big into like BioWare RPGs at the time, like Neverwinter Nights, and this felt more. This felt bigger. It is bigger. Oblivion is huge, and this huge open world where you have all this potential to build your character. It fulfilled a specific fantasy that I had. The problem was, like you said, it was jank, and like I did get vampirism at one point, which made me drop the game. And like it didn't help that that's also around the time I got BioShock, and BioShock was the game that really changed me. So like I got distracted from Oblivion, but like you, Fallout 3 was the game that like sucked. That's what did it.
Yeah.
Like for me, the reason Fallout 3 was the one, like rather than Oblivion, which I did play a bit, I was like, Bethesda wasn't really on my radar. I was just like, oh, Oblivion's really cool. I didn't even know about Morrowind, really. I knew it was the fourth game, but I didn't even pay attention. Fallout 3 did it because there was this fantasy, this video game fantasy that I wanted so badly, and I looked everywhere for this kind of experience. I wanted an RPG with shooting mechanics, which now, I mean, nowadays that doesn't sound like, wow, that's so
how original, yeah.
But then I was
now if anything, we've gone too hard in that direction.
My fantasy has been fulfilled like 20 times over.
Yeah,
it's become a nightmare.
Exactly.
Thanks, Julian. Your fantasies ruined the industry. Okay.
Too many people like me.
Oh god.
It was like I'm like, oh, I want like the inventory system of an RPG, and I want like weight limits and like equipments and stats, but with like shooting mechanics. I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool. And then I remember seeing the trailer for Fallout, and I was like, I'm done. Like,
yeah,
I never played Fallout 1, I never played Fallout 2. I don't even know what those are, but I want Fallout 3 right now.
Yeah,
I can hang up the rest of my library right now. They'll never compare.
Yeah,
I played when I got it in like the lunchbox and everything. And I was like, when I bought Fallout 3, I played a scary amount of Fallout 3. Like, that was just all I did, and I definitely played it like to its limit as opposed to Oblivion. Which I kind of just gave up on, unfortunately. But still like Oblivion. It's just Fallout 3 was, like Dan said, that was really the one that pulled me in.
It felt like a love letter to a side of me that I never knew existed. You know?
Yeah.
You're talking about Fallout there?
Fallout 3. Yeah.
Yeah. I had prior experience of Fallout, so playing Fallout 3 was a little jarring because I had gotten used to that like isometric RPG kind of thing. And when I saw Fallout, I played Fallout 1 actually.
Okay.
I had a friend back when I was a wee child, that was into PC gaming, and he had Fallout 1 and Counter-Strike, and I was like, Fallout 1 is bonkers, it's ridiculous, it's insane, and I loved everything of it. And then I saw Fallout 3, and I was like, I don't know that I can play a game like Fallout in an engine like Morrowind, because I was worried of the implications. Like in Morrowind, if you were bad with swords, you can flail at a mud crab for half an hour without touching it once. Your skill will go up a bunch, but you're not going to have a dead mud crab in front of you. And I was worried that things like that were going to carry over, where it doesn't matter if you aim at the guy, if your skill with guns is low, you'll miss anyways. And I was kind of worried about stuff like that. Lucky for me, it wasn't the case, and I had a lot of fun playing Fallout 3, but I think my prior experience of the franchise kind of held me back a little bit, because I could feel that break in tone, whereas Oblivion, when Oblivion came out after Morrowind, to me, what Oblivion did was to fix everything that annoyed me about Morrowind, offer me a bigger world, and just let me loose in there so much that I would end up always like getting lost in this endless series of side quests, never attending to the main quest, like forgetting where the main quest even was at this point. And then I would just drop the game because either I'd save like in a save loop of myself just dying over and over and over again, or I'd erase my save, or like something would happen and I would always have to restart. And so I never got like super far. But I enjoyed Oblivion so much, and then 11-11-11 hit. And the rest is history.
Yeah, basically.
Play the game of all years on your favorite toaster near you, and you'll be happy for the rest of your life. Because even with all the critique that down the line people gave to Skyrim, it's still easily one of the most accessible, one of the most readily available fun in an Elder Scrolls game you can have.
I'd say games in general. I think.
And Skyrim, then basically.
It's like it got anyone who's remotely interested in fantasy, even if you're not a gamer, it's like, oh yeah, you could just jump into Skyrim and live a fantasy.
Yeah, you get past the little bit of a hump at the beginning, and then the dragon shows up, and then it's game on. Like, let's go.
That's it. You do what you want. You live your fantasy. It's like you live your high fantasy RPG world that you want to live in, and mod it to whatever you want it to be, even more what you want it to be. So even if you're like some non-gamer casual who wants to just get involved, it's still very accessible, and it's always been very accessible, as opposed to Morrowind and Oblivion, which are, like you said, they're a bit more hardcore.
Yeah, it's a gamer's game, realistically. Like you got to know RPG mechanics, you got to understand like all that business. You can't just take a sword and whack a thing because the number says so. Like it certainly makes more expectations on the player's part, I'd say.
For sure, you need to do your due diligence if you're playing like Oblivion or Morrowind. Like you need to know like the stats, and you need to be a bit smarter with how you prepare your character. For Skyrim, oh man, but I did, you know what, say what you will, I did appreciate that, because I felt like the complexity of Oblivion didn't make me want to play it more. I know that that's different, not everyone is like that, but for me, Skyrim, because of its accessibility, it made it more exciting. Like even the magic in Skyrim felt more like plasmids in BioShock, and I loved that. I was like, oh wow, I just shoot fireballs, or I could dual wield. And,
I hated the magic system in Skyrim.
Okay, so like that's because you were used to like the more like RPG elements.
It felt really simple and really empty in comparison to Oblivion or Morrowind.
And you're absolutely right. But that's also why I felt it was accessible and easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's what they had to gain. They removed a lot of the fluff in favor of keeping things simple. And if it works for the average casual, it gets, or for someone that's not really into the whole magic builds or whatever, once you start getting into it, like as a main class, it becomes really, really bad. Just in terms of what's available to you to use, it's always just a which element are you going to use, and more often than not, there's a right answer. So you don't feel like you're being creative with magic. Magic is just another sword and board.
Yeah, it's a reskin of the core gameplay loop of Skyrim,
basically. You change the shield for a ward, you change the sword for a lightning bolt or a fireball, and it's done.
Yeah.
But it looks pretty.
But it looks pretty, and it's effective. It does what it has to do. I mean, you can always do some of the more like unusual playthroughs with magic, where you're doing like illusion sneak and all of that stuff. But ultimately, like part of the fun with Oblivion was getting to the point of the Mage Guild where you can craft your own spells and then just fucking around and experimenting with it to no end. Like creating a spell that basically uses all of your mana but creates this giant explosion that just kills everything in as big a radius as you can set it to be. Like, it's fun to create those little things. It's details, but it's details of personalization that really gave a lot of depth to Oblivion, where Skyrim becomes a little lacking a little quickly.
Yeah, well, I think what you said there, the being able to personalize in the details, because obviously, like, sorry, let me just contextualize what I'm about to say here, because obviously we understand why Skyrim does what it does and why Fallout 4 did what it did as far as streamlining. Because I mean, you could even even at the time that Oblivion came out, it was accused of similar things in comparison to Morrowind.
Of course,
yeah, definitely.
And again, we can simply sit here and understand. Okay, we all know why they're doing it, and we all can see the perks of doing it. But and I guess this could be our first more specific question. Would you say though that kind of building off what you said about the personalized details, that these games in particular, these style of games in particular, lose a bit of what makes them special in this attempt to broadly appeal?
Massively, yes.
Yeah, it's the Dark Souls argument. Where like, should there be an easy mode, for accessibility? I mean, like, businessmen would say yes, because that's just good business. You could sell to more people. But artists and actual gamers and like dedicated fans will say no, because it changes something too much. And I could kind of see people being on that side of the fence, especially when coming to, I mean, like, Skyrim was the oversimplification of everything, or at least the streamlining of everything. I can agree to Louis that it does feel like you are kind of shoehorned in a bit more of a melee class, because magic was kind of stripped away. They removed the spell creation system. That was in most of the Bethesda games beforehand, and then there's still a mage's college here. They could have totally done it. The acrobatic skill, the athletic skill. Like, how much nicer would it have been to like jump up a mountain?
Some of those skills, just quickly, like, they removed some of those skills because they weren't really useful, and more often than not, they just break the game. Like, acrobatics allowed you to jump on places you weren't supposed to reach because you could jump higher than was expected you would.
Of course, but you could also just get a horse and, pardon my French, but face fuck a mountain until you get to the top of it.
That's more glitch territory.
Yeah, but I'd argue that
that's
acrobatics is part of that charming,
part of the lore,
personalized and aspect of the games.
I won't disagree with that,
because you could make the same kind of argument as to why they don't let you make spells anymore. Because, my God, the things you can create in Oblivion and Morrowind don't even...
Trust me, I know.
Like you want to talk about... You can break the game much more than a jumpy man ever could hope to do with the spell system, spell crafting.
Probably so.
And I think... because you think you can jump high with acrobatics at 100?
You can get scrolls that make you jump like ridiculous heights. Don't worry, like it's or potions.
Or make some potions of jumping and stuff, and then you can leap from the Imperial City
leap
to
over
Kavash
the last dungeon.
Yeah.
Was it in Morrowind that you can just leap over the mountain and get to the last boss, like basically 6 minutes into the game?
Yeah,
like
once you get those scrolls from the guy that falls out of the
sky,
guy that falls
out of the sky. You just gotta have the potions to land a landing.
Yeah, you just have to be able to survive the fall, which is...
Do people speedrun Oblivion?
Of course.
Oh,
of course.
my god, that must
If
be
you
fucking
think,
hilarious.
do people speedrun insert X game here? Yes. Go on speedrun.com. There's this leaderboard for everything.
That must be
Literally,
really
people
fun.
speedrun Angry Birds. They speedrun everything. Shoutouts to the speedrun communities of everything. Like these guys break games like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, that sort of thing really. Honestly, I don't want to go too off topics, but I just want to say like I find it amazing, like the sub communities, the niche sub communities of gaming, and like speedrunning, how big that became, and what that does. Like, it's not a domain I even look at much, but it's incredible to see the different ways games are used from how you imagine they might be used, and see how they play a game. Like, because I already can envision what a speedrunner playing Oblivion is probably going to look like.
Well, it depends, and it's going to depend massively too. Like within something like speedrunning, you have a lot of communities that are going to be like more centered around glitched percent, where they just clip through a lot of shit and use a bunch of bugs to their advantage to just rush to the end. If you want to beat Skyrim very quickly, learn how to clip through walls using a pot or a plate, and you'll be done. But for other people, it's just like, how can you play the game as fast as possible as intended? And then you realize all the little things you can do just to push your character either through its DPS or just through skipping certain parts of certain main quests. Just like, you can pick this up way ahead of time and just hand it later when you need to. Because you're
It's like a deconstruction. It's like a deconstruction or a dismantling of the game that you know.
Yeah.
And I find that that's like I just find it amazing that something like that even exists. Like the depth, like it shows really the depth of the game, and like it shows how many ways you can approach it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that it exists. It's really not my cup of tea. Like I have no interest in speedrunning. Even watching it, I don't really do that. But I love that it exists nonetheless.
I learned a couple speedruns just because they were easy, like glitch percent runs. That's just like, I can finish Pokemon Leaf Green in 6 minutes. Not Leaf Green, but original Japan edition green. Oh, Jacob, what's going on to your castle here?
I don't.
Some of the textures aren't loading properly.
Oh my!
Can you
the collision as well? The collision isn't even there.
He did it! He did it!
He done did it.
Oh wait, what's wrong with the guy? Did you see
Put in the sound effect. Yeah, we found a Bethesda glitch.
I mean,
so Bethesda glitch, bug or feature?
Bug, definitely bug. We called bugs features in the NES days because we didn't know how else to call it, but now it's definitely a bug.
Yeah.
Oh man.
God, wow,
I feel it's almost expected at this point to find some nasty, buggy shenanigans.
The more complex
it should be though.
The more complex your engine gets, the more open and prone you're going to be to things like this. The problem, and that's something we addressed when we had our little talk of the industry, is that a lot of these bugs could be avoided if they just spent a little more time and a little more money working on the engines. Like some of these bugs, like there's a big bug in the Bethesda engine that's used in Fallout 3 runs, it's used in Oblivion runs, it's used in Fallout 4 runs, I'm pretty sure it's used in Skyrim runs, where it's a glitch about the quick save quick load feature, where you can like load a player but from another save because you're confusing the quick load function into loading the wrong player at the wrong place.
Wow.
And like that bug's been a thing for so long that you would think Bethesda either knows of it or just doesn't do anything about it, or doesn't know because it doesn't look for bugs. I don't know. Like, it's so used in the speedrunning community, you would think that they know of it. Especially since apparently Bethesda does this thing where they host like an internal speedrunning competition every time they launch a game. So you would think that they know more about the bugs of their own engine, and their reluctance to fix some of it really, to me at least, shows that they were going to milk an engine dry, putting as little money into it as they can in favor of other things like graphic and side quests, I suppose.
I don't even think it's so much that they're like trying to milk their engine as much as, at least especially, you know, with Skyrim, especially as their plan to milk the modders, because they know every glitch. They know like there's going to be a, you know, unofficial Skyrim patch in a few months from a modder who'll do their job for them for free. And at least in the PC community, it's just expected. You know?
This kind of expectation is what got Fallout 4 in a whole lot of trouble because of the Creation Club.
Yeah.
When they announced that buyers of the season pass would get access to all DLCs for free, and then they came up with the Creation Club that introduced quest lines, not just items, but like straight up quests and areas. then the people who said we were supposed to get all the DLCs and we didn't get those got really upset. And Fallout 4 made the big mistake of not having a EULA that protected the company against stuff like that. So they're being sued right now. I don't know if it's settled or what happened with that. I don't like to keep track of those news because more often than not, it turns into slander of people that were just trying to do honest work. But yeah, they kind of expose themselves to risk in doing that. And that at some point, as much as the modders are gonna want to mod good games like Skyrim and Oblivion and all of that, if people stop buying the games because they don't enjoy the base version of them, the modders aren't gonna mod a game that's dead.
Yeah.
So they still have to be careful that they publish something that's palatable, at least, at the very least. Especially if they're going to be asking for a pretty penny for it. But, yeah, I'm personally a big turnoff when it comes to getting bugs and all of that. Like, it kills me inside to see something like Valhalla in the beginning had so many, like, quest progression bugs that I'm just like, did you even test your game? Like... A bunch of people are having those bugs. It's not just me, like, and it's in the beginning too. You would think that you would at least have one rig in your studio that encountered the problem. But yeah, I'm getting a little besides the point here. Where, what were we trying to say? God damn
we were talking about we as usual we got a little sidetracked, but the last question
first experience with Bethesda. Yes.
Well, no, I asked more specifically, is the loss of these things like
customization definitely.
Like,
because customization is an exploration of the world, sure, but it's an exploration of self too. And if you're barring me certain possibilities for the sake of streamlining it for the more casual players, then there is a loss for the people who like to go deeper in exploring what it is to be a character in this world. It's one thing to have a world to explore, but if your character's just a blank slab of a Viking with a sword and a shield, it kind of puts the experience down of what can be explored or how it can be explored. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree, which is why the gradual trend towards streamlining the experience is worrisome, and maybe get into a bit more of that when we talk about Starfield, which I think we can save for a bit later as we talk about the future of Bethesda. But yeah, like I feel like as great as Skyrim is and all that, but especially its vanilla version, it definitely feels like it's missing something, compared to, Oblivion and Morrowind. Skyrim is a lot like, I think Dan's the only one who fully appreciates this comparison, but Skyrim is a lot like Wrath of the Lich King. It still did enough, like, it still had all, the check marks as far as awesome lore, cool story characters, whatever, but it was that point where you can no longer deny that they were dumbing it down. It wasn't bad enough that like it was a problem, I just hope Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield isn't Cata, although you could argue maybe Fallout 4 already was. Right. But it managed to hit that sweet spot between accessibility and depth, obviously bolstered greatly by the insanely awesome modding community for that game. But you keep doing more like they did with Fallout, and then you get what we got with Fallout, which is not an RPG, not a Bethesda game, at least in the way we'd come to expect a Bethesda game to be.
I have some points of defense for Fallout 4, although I have to agree that it fell short in certain areas, and the RPG, like the customization of your character side of the RPG was definitely lost.
Yeah, like I've always said,
entirely.
Fallout 4 isn't a bad game, it's just an awful RPG and a bad Fallout game.
Bad Fallout, yeah.
If you take away that it's called, if you take, put it in some other generic, post-apocalyptic world, call it Apocalypse Cry or something, or Far Out, or whatever, then you would have had a great...
Far Out! Yeah, that'd be great.
Great,
Far
successful game.
I think it works with the Fallout universe. I just don't think it should have been Fallout 4. Like, it shouldn't have been where the series tried to anchor itself as this is where we are now. It could have been like a little spin-off game. Well, spin-off. Like a little side game that's just like Fallout Boston or wherever. They're in Commonwealth, right?
Yeah.
In Fallout 4. So, like, it could have been like just Fallout Boston. And then you're just playing in this... Because they did from the start mention that we want to paint a different side of the Fallout universe by showing what happens 100 years after the bombs when the world starts healing. And I can get behind an idea like that, and a lot of the choices reflected in the game certainly show that. The advancements you see to civilization, both in terms of how they function, but in terms of their humanity being preserved. You can see the world is a lot more colorful than it was in Fallout 3, not just because of enhanced graphical properties, but because of the palette choices that they used.
Took off the green hue.
They took off the
dominated the game.
It was everywhere.
That's fair.
Like they wanted to give it more color, more vibrancy. Like they tried and they achieved that, but the cost of doing that kind of robbed Fallout of that edge. That really like gut-wrenching. The world is a horrible place to be in. That made Fallout so poignant.
Yeah.
That made it so effective.
Yeah. And I think not only, did they fail in the way you said, but even, it's not necessarily just because they tried to make a more lived-in world, because if you look back, and, Louis, you probably know this as well as anyone here, that if anything, Fallout 3 is the most uncivilized Fallout game. Because if you look at the lore and the stuff that's going on the West Coast games, especially as it's presented in New Vegas, I mean, you have full-fledged government bodies and armies
the
NCR. and Caesar's Legion and even just the city of Vegas itself and the people who run that. Like, it's much more civilized than anything really in Fallout 3, because Fallout 3 really is just that pure, like,
Fallout 3 is chaos.
Yeah.
It's the chaos of the aftermath.
Yeah.
Fallout 4, what I liked about New Vegas, and I like that you brought it up, it's that they did what I think Fallout 4 could have been, where the world was broken. It's kind of like a broken bone. If you don't set it right, it's going to set itself twisted, and it's going to hurt for the rest of your life. And after an aftermath, like what happened in the Fallout universe, and what you see in Fallout New Vegas is exactly what I would expect of a world that's healing. It's people who have convictions, they still try to organize, but there's something that was broken that can never come back. Like, when you get to New Vegas and you get into Gomorrah the first time, you get to know, the White Glove Society?
Yeah.
And you get to realize as you interact with them that these people are cannibals. And like that's part they broke something, they had to adapt, resorting to cannibalism, and eventually it became part of their culture. And that's something I wanted to see more in Fallout 4, whereas what part of the aftermath became internalized as culture now? What is it that would be unspeakable horror now, but that they can do casually just because the world isn't what it used to be?
Yeah,
and
it's super cool. I never even thought about that, but it is something I
and
love.
Fallout 4 really sugarcoats it like hard, because people just go back to wanting to play baseball even though they have no idea what baseball is, and like it falls back into a normality that these people never knew, which is why for me Fallout 4 felt really eerie. Because there's no reason for these people to like print a paper and just being your average just like trash journalist that's just trying to stir shit. And like, I don't know, Fallout 4 had a bit of a disconnect with what the universe should have been.
Yeah, well, I mean,
where New Vegas addressed it much better, and sadly for New Vegas, it wasn't the Bethesda game. So
well, more sadly for Bethesda, that wasn't a Bethesda game. But I think it's interesting you bring that up too, because even going back to Fallout 3, I leveled up.
I'll be right back, guys. Sorry.
Bethesda Fallouts have always been kind of disconnected at best, contradictory at worst to the established lore of the previous games and of New Vegas. Like yes, okay, it's got the Fallout name, it's got similar aesthetic stuff, Vault Boy, the 1950s retro future vibe, all that. But aside from that, it basically disregards all the lore from the previous games and blatantly contradicts it. Like, like groups like the Enclave and the Brotherhood of Steel have absolutely no business being on the East Coast, and it's the kind of thing that does warrant at least some kind of explanation, because cross-continental travel is a little difficult in a world like that.
I think that's something that's explained in one of the little side games, although, and it's weird to say because a lot of those side games are quoted as being non-canon. Hold on, let me just look it up. I think that's something that's explained in...
Is that Fallout Tactics,
what's
maybe?
the name? Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that game's great.
But yeah, and it's weird because they made some design choices on something that they then called like non-canon, so it's really weird. But hold on, I just want to check my sources. So if you guys want to talk, it's fine. There's a Fallout Brotherhood of Steel game in 2004 that
God, right. Yeah, that fucking monstrosity.
Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel and then Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. Basically, they had like in Fallout 4, they had Pridwin-like ships, but more than one, and then some of them crash on their way to the East Coast. So it's plausible to assume that being in power armor all the time, some of them survived and actually made their way to the East Coast.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't want to give them more credit than is worth.
Yeah,
so
I don't even know if that game was,
No, it was like a mobile game. It was
what, Fallout Brotherhood? No, that was supposed to come out on the Xbox, but it never did.
It was like Xbox Arcade and shit like this. Yeah.
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 So yeah. I forgot what we were.
The clash in tone of the new Fallout games.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I think we about covered that. But yeah, it goes back to, I don't think Bethesda, maybe it wasn't intentional, but it's kind of
okay. Well, then,
believe, but I don't think they ever.
You think maybe it wasn't intentional? Do you think it's a possibility that they toned down how harsh Fallout's world was again to make it more palatable to the masses?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I would certainly think
Fallout 4 was infinitely easier to consume in that sense for people.
Like it was easier on the conscience.
Yeah.
It didn't ask the hard questions.
Fallout 3, Jacob, I think you've said it best in the past. Like the first fucking, what was it, like 15 minutes of the game? You go, you shoot your bully in the face after making his mother get eaten by roaches, and you fucking blow up a whole town full of people for a couple bottle caps. Which I guess is currency now. The game just expects you to be okay with that.
Yeah.
And to accept that the first town was like, yeah, no, we only take bottle caps.
Money, then...
Are you fucking kidding me?
It doesn't matter what the money actually is. If it's money, it's money. It buys you power. Money's power.
As long as people are taking it as currency, then that's all that matters.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's like...
Yeah, I can definitely agree.
Fallout 4 just kind of like... It very much dumbed some things down.
It had to.
Yeah.
Because that's what AAA gaming is nowadays. It's doing everything it can to do these big productions, but the only way they can make their money is if they can find a way to appeal to more than just the diehard gamers. And the only way they've found to do that, unfortunately, is to dumb things down.
Yeah. But you gotta wonder, is there a point where the benefits of dumbing it down no longer outweigh the cons of dumbing it down?
Yes, and I think we're starting to see it. With the general critique that Fallout 4 had over the years, with the main critique of the Elder Scrolls having been, they're dumbing it down, they're dumbing it down, they're dumbing it down. It's going to come to a point where the hardcore gamers aren't going to want to get it, because they won't want to have to lean... Like, as much as we're ready to lean on mods, if the base game isn't worth it, then it's not going to sell as much, and the hype won't pick up as much.
Mm-hmm.
As much as hype culture is toxic, in a part, it's encouraged by gamers. It's because true gamers, and I hate to say this, but it's because the gamers, the ones that are really waiting for these Elder Scrolls 6 to come out, can't stop talking about it. It's because it's the only thing on our mind. We want it, we dream of it. We've been wanting Elder Scrolls 6 since we put down Skyrim, for better or for worse. I mean, but it's us that are encouraging this movement, and if they can't get that talk going and get people talking about their games, then a part of their marketing effort is going into nothing because people won't be receptive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I just hope that that they, you know, do recognize that. I imagine at some point there'll be a point of no return where if you go too far, like it will bite them in the ass. I just worry, you know, even after coming out of Fallout 4, you know, the games, and you know, we can make the same argument with CD Projekt Red and whatever they do after Cyberpunk is both, you know, Fallout 4 and Cyberpunk especially sold like absurd amounts of copies and made absurd amounts of money at their launch. Now, obviously, they both died out pretty quick and fizzled out, but they still got that initial surge of.
The only thing they get out of things like this, though, is a bit of a lifeline to produce more. But as these mistakes happen more and more, and I mean, we've seen it happen with BioWare. Yeah. If it keeps happening, the studios aren't gonna get these massive fund injections, and at some point, they just won't have the luxury of keeping on doing that. Bethesda is probably the one studio that has the most leeway to fuck up still, because as far as I know, Skyrim sold so many copies on so many different systems that they can fail for decades and still not see the end of it.
Basically.
But they still have to be careful, because otherwise they're gonna get the BioWare treatment of just seeing some of their talents go away, seeing the general quality of their games go down, and seeing people look away at the new kids on the block.
Yeah.
I honestly don't even think that Fallout 4 was as much of a mistake as it comes off as. I think I see it as kind of an experiment. They were trying out something to see if it could work.
Fallout 4 wasn't a mistake. Fallout 76 was a mistake.
Yeah, Fallout 76 was like, yeah, there's a lot to be said about that. 4 was like, it was a Fallout game. It's just that the things that they tried to change to see, like, oh, maybe this is the direction we should go in, and they got the feedback that, you know, that showed. Oh, we'll see. I mean, it still sold a lot, like you said, Jacob, but we'll see if that's if the criticisms were enough to shift the production on Fallout 5 whenever that may come. Or I think realistically how it'll affect Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6, because I think that like they're not completely tone deaf. I think that they're still like they could see everything we see, right? Like they see it. It just depends whether or not they want to listen or not. Like what they determine is worthwhile to change or to maintain. And I think that there were things in Fallout 4 that were really good, like that were great, and there were things that didn't work so well. The thing is, they need to find a way, because they still need to move forward no matter what. So they need to find a way to merge the things that worked in Fallout 4 with the things that worked in Fallout 3 and earlier. And to me, I think that that's going to be fucking hard, because I don't realistically see them going back to the dialogue systems of Fallout 3 New Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're probably going to stick with voice protagonists, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a death sentence. It just means I mean, I think it's possible that they won't, but I think it's likely that they're not going to go back on that. I just think that it's not, and even that doesn't. It's not a death sentence. I think they still could deliver something interesting with it. It's a lot harder. It's a constraint that they're going to have, an added constraint. So, like, well, listen. I mean, if you look at CD Projekt Red, I know Cyberpunk 2077 has its own issues, but one thing I can say with absolute certainty is that they have tons of dialogue and dialogue options, and they're still, regardless of what you think of them, there is still so much, and a lot of it is actually quite well written. So I think that if they could do that, but maintain maybe more variety.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with the voice protagonist, is it's hard to get the kind of variety, especially the kind of variety that a Bethesda game is known for. Because yeah, sure, Cyberpunk has like, you know, an encyclopedia of voice dialogue, but we talked about when we talked about Cyberpunk is it's all so geared towards the street kid. You sound and act like a street kid no matter what. Just like in Fallout 4, you sound and act like a parent who gives a shit about his kid.
Those are the lines that are recorded, whereas dialogue, not only can, like, is it way cheaper to produce, for one thing, I feel like it actually feels more immersive, if you ask me, because it's still that self-insert, whereas opposed to Fallout 4, no matter who you are, you're still that guy or that girl who's looking for your son, and no matter how you say that dialogue, that's your end game, you know?
I mean, the thing I have about the whole idea of the voice protagonist is that the protagonist was never silent. He was mute, but he was never silent.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, you get your own rating of the line that you see on the screen in your head, and you get to pretty much decide how it sounds, but you don't have a say of what the line actually is. So for me to hear the line actually voiced out by someone, like, sure, sometimes the intonation isn't what I would have chosen, or the subject matter isn't always where I'd go. And not being a parent, I can't tell you how obsessive the idea of losing your child can be. But to me, it wasn't such a bummer. Because as much as it removed something from my ability to shape that character into what I thought he was, or what I wanted him to be, it still helped shape a character that fit in the scope of the main quest.
If I wanted that, I'd play The Witcher.
But yeah, and I get that,
You know?
and I get that. But you gotta remember when you play these big open worlds, you gotta remember that in the case of Fallout and Skyrim and on the Elder Scrolls and Bethesda games in general, you gotta remember that there's a story that they're trying to tell through that.
Yes, but until Fallout 4, the story was the least important aspect of those games.
Maybe so.
Like, you look at Skyrim, like, okay, you're Dragonborn, cool. That's the extent of that story. You kill some dragons, you save the world, because the stories in Bethesda games, at least classic Bethesda games, if you will, is merely a, something to ground you, just as basic as can be reason for you and your character to exist in this world, to give you a bit of raison d'etre.
Yeah,
that's it. That's all it's there for. It's all it was ever meant to be there for. It's all it ever should be there for in a traditional Bethesda game. And me, as much as anybody here, I'm all for a more curated story, a more defined character, like with The Witcher and such. But if you're going to do that, well, I mean, first of all, no one
don't call it an RPG anymore. For one thing.
I disagree on that.
Final Fantasy is an RPG, and you never get to pick anything about your characters in Final Fantasy.
Yeah, when did Mass Effect
literally the first Final Fantasy game, you made your entire party.
Yeah, but you don't get to pick who they were before. You don't get to pick anything about them, and for everything that came after, that choice was taken away from you. You gave them jobs, sure, but they were still the guy from the village and the wizard in the woods and who they were is still, in an RPG, playing RPG doesn't mean you're a blank state. It means you have some degree of choice as to how your character deals with things, which Fallout 4 does offer. It offers the same variety of energy weapons and projectile weapons.
It does not.
Well, it shrunk down a little bit, but
a little. I feel like
I'll agree with Jacob on this one.
Let me tell you why I stopped playing Fallout 4. All right, so you can get an idea. I wanted to play a science-based energy weapons character.
Sure.
Super sciencey. Only
yeah, that's
weapons.
My usual go-to when I play Fallout. So you're not losing me there.
So I started playing Fallout 4, trying to do that, and sure, I had a energy weapon and another energy pistol, and that was the extent of the energy weapons, pretty much. And I never felt like a scientist. And then I was like, okay, let me just see if I'm just being too hard on Fallout 4.
Yeah, I remember you called me when you were doing this.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna start up a New Vegas playthrough, make the exact same character, science build, energy weapons, and I'm gonna play them side by side so I can really see if there's a difference. You want to know how big of a difference there was? I have not played Fallout 4 a single minute since I started that New Vegas playthrough, and I never felt like a scientist.
You mean like dialogue? You mean dialogue options, or
all of it? Dialogue, both.
Because well, you're looking at two games with a very Fallout 4 really completely reworked the RPG behind everything it did.
Yeah, but that's my point. Is they pulled away all this stuff in that effort to rework, to make it as barely an RPG as possible. And again, it's not because it's a voice protagonist, because no one's going to sit here and say Mass Effect's not an RPG anymore.
No, I mean,
it's more
in terms of like weaponry and character actions, it's roughly it equates to roughly the same.
No,
because
it really doesn't.
The weapons, for having played New Vegas very recently and having done that kind of sciencey playthrough, they've changed the rapport of how skills interact with the world. But the bulk of the difference is that in New Vegas, your science skill was like, you could talk people in or out of certain situations with it, depending on if it was relevant. You could hack in or out of terminals, which is still something you can do. Maybe not by leveling up your hacking or your computer skill, what they call it, science.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But just by leveling up science, now you have to level up your int and get the right perks. But that's just them adapting the old setting to the new. But in terms of weapon choice, the laser pistols and rifles are still there. The plasma pistols and rifles are still there.
There's much less though. Like just pull up a weapons list from both games, and you'll see there's
because
a big difference.
the bulk of what Fallout 4 did was to open customization like crazy. There's not less. There's less base forms of stuff because they're expecting you to do the work of making them the way you want.
But
there's a lot
think they
more
give you the means to do that. No,
they do. They
I have to
do.
strongly disagree. There's no possibilities in Fallout 4 unless you're modding it, but that's a typical event.
No, even without the mods, the crafting added a lot. I find that New Vegas, especially if you look at just New Vegas was very like, you get a list of laser rifles that pretty much all act the same and behave mostly the same.
Not really.
They were like plasma cannons and shit.
There was a lot of variety of different. There's like plasma, there's laser, and there's actually a difference between plasma and laser.
There is plasma.
There's Tesla armor. There's so you have
but
one.
I think what he's getting at is that it just didn't feel as though there was any main difference. At the end of the day, it was all doing like either energy weapons or not energy weapons. Like there were only the two ballistic kinds of damage. Like New Vegas was amazing because they even added different ballistics for guns. You could have different bullets and different calibers. So like as much as Fallout 4, like I think a combination of the two.
Well, they had this quality of ammunition, but the different calibers was really just a certain caliber fit into a certain gun, and that was it. I like the idea of like varying degrees of quality of ammunition, but in terms of the types of damage, all of the types of damage that were in New Vegas are still in Fallout 4. Plasma damage was still energy weapon damage in Fallout New Vegas. It was the same. Most of the mechanics work exactly the same, which is why I didn't feel like there was something lost. It just feels different because of the way it's presented, because of the way it's offered. But ultimately, a laser rifle in New Vegas is a laser rifle in Fallout 4, like almost to the pixel, like to the way the gun is designed. You get to be the one who adds the Gatling upgrade or the extended ammo capacity or change the stock for a stock that gives you more stability. Those are all options that weren't there in New Vegas for the most part. You had the option of putting scopes. You had the option of putting little modifiers that boost the damage a little bit, but that was it. For the rest, all of the guns you would find were basically carbon copies of one another, and you would just end up fusing together to repair your stuff. I didn't feel like there was more richness in the guns per se. There was maybe more unique weapons in New Vegas that there was in Fallout 4, but in terms of the run-of-the-mill, just picked up from the floor stuff, I feel very little difference.
Well, we shall agree to strongly disagree, because you're wrong.
Because you are objectively incorrect.
I didn't play New Vegas, so I can't even really...
I played New Vegas very recently because I hadn't. And it's good. It's what everybody says about it probably being the best, like, Bethesda engine Fallout, because it wasn't Bethesda that made it. Yeah. But it's true. Like, New Vegas still holds up really well, and it is a very good game. I just disagree with a lot of the flack that when it gets compared to Fallout 4, like, yes, it was dumbed down in many regards, but I feel like the variety is still there within reach. It's just you got to get more work done to get to it because you got to get the right perks to build the right upgrades and put them into your guns or get lucky and find it on a gun. And like it was more tedious to see the variety because in New Vegas it was just you pick up a gun, ooh, that gun's cool, and then just start using that.
Okay, I mean, let me just throw this out there. There are more energy pistols than there are energy weapons in Fallout.
Yeah, how much of them are actually useful?
All of them, depending on how you want to do. A lot of them are unique.
Yeah,
let me different things like sonic emitters, alien blaster.
Alien blaster was in Fallout 4, by the way.
I mean, still, you know what I'm saying. And again, like, and if you look at the energy weapons list for Fallout 4, and you look at the laser one, there's like 15 there, but there's only like 4 actually different guns there. Whereas if you
because the magic happens in the customization. It happens in the crafting. It happens to what you do with it. Like what
but it doesn't really change anything. Like, you just change how it looks and like.
No, it changes really a lot about how it works. You can buff damage. You can buff stability. You can
do that in New Vegas too. New Vegas has mods for your guns.
But not to that extent is what I'm getting at.
But I would rather have 10 guns that I can mod somewhat than 3 guns that are the same that I can fake mod to an extent. You know, like I said, I played 50 hours as a science build. I had one science-based weapon, one energy rifle that it felt like the same as all the others. Like and there was no difference between. There was almost no plasma weapons in the game of Fallout 4 to begin with. There's literally 3.
You didn't get far enough.
There's literally 3. I'm looking at the list. There's literally 3.
There's 3.
Don't tell me to get far enough. I'm looking at the list.
There's 3 base forms. What you do with them after that is more varied in terms of what you can and can't put into your gun than the list that I'm seeing from New Vegas. You get more fine-tuning, more possibility.
Yeah, but does that fine-tuning actually change anything? It's still the same gun.
It very much does. It changes everything from the way the gun looks to the way the gun behaves.
I mean, I'll say here. I'll make this point. This is kind of a bit of a non-argument because when you compare the fucking FPS systems in both games, like obviously, yeah, certain things can be said that they do more in New Vegas, but New Vegas is kind of more of like a general feel of a game, whereas Fallout 4 was definitely more like it's a shooter. You know, at the end of the day, it's a shooter. Of course, the modifications are going to feel like they mean more, and I understand where Louis getting at with this. But I also get where Jacob's getting at, where it feels like by just giving us a couple base forms and then say, go play, it to some extent, I could see some players being like, well, that's kind of lazy. Because I miss finding the random repeater pistol, which was just this, the recharge pistol, whatever, which is just this gun that it shot lasers, but it recharged
weapon that slowly refills over time.
Exactly. Like, I think what Jacob's getting at is that there weren't those unique. I would love to see those two games merge in terms of their weapon customization.
At some point, it becomes a question of preference too, because the last playthrough of Fallout 4 I did the ultimate scrapper, which is basically I would pick up like a pipe gun, whatever, and I would try to upgrade the hell out of it until it wasn't anything it was in the beginning. Right. And I started with a pipe pistol, and by the time I was done with that gun and picked up something else, it was like a pipe rifle with this jank scope, and like it had a shoulder rest that wasn't optimal. Like, you can't do that in New Vegas. Like, not anything.
Well, not vanilla, but if we're talking about Fallout 4 offers nothing unique that mods haven't already done.
Yeah, but
you
when
can
we
get
start
a much more extensive. Yeah, but
the thing about getting
we're talking
mods
about
into
Bethesda.
The
yeah, that's true.
But the danger about getting mods into the discussion is that a lot of mods were made with the idea of taking something that worked later and adapting it to something previous, or vice versa. A lot of those mods were made out of a drive of the community to restore either something that was lost or expand on something that they found skimped out. And yes, it can be described as lazy from the studio to kind of rely on, well, the modders can figure it out. But at some point, there's a question of preference of, do you prefer to pick up something and replace your equipment with what you've picked up? Or do you prefer to have this personal relationship with your weapon because you've put in, like, I don't know, like 50 hours of exploring to get all the upgrades you need to get it to what you want it to be? Like, it's a different perspective entirely on what equipment even means. Because in Fallout New Vegas, by the time I finished the game, everything I was wearing and using was stuff I picked up from the floor, used basically stock, if not for just adding a scope on it. I can dig that. Like, my character was pretty cool by the end. But there's certainly a value to me to the idea that armor I'm wearing now, I had to make it what it is. I had to make it as effective as it is. by getting the ballistic weave for all the cloth items, by getting all the proper recipes for all the upgrades for my gun, and the resources to craft them. Like, there's a process. The whole process of playing Fallout 4 is very different. Because Fallout 4 was created with this idea that you were to put your footstep... It was like landing on the moon and putting your foot there, right? You get to build your settlements, you get to talk to people, and like, yo, you should come back to my base. There's fun stuff happening there. And like, it was built with this idea of customizing in mind, with this idea of forget finding the next best thing in the world, because the next best thing in the world, you're about to make it. It was a completely different philosophy, which is why, like, sure, looking at a list of equipment, you might feel like the list dwindled down, but the possibilities that they offered with the few base stock equipment they gave, and yes, that list should have been bigger, I can agree to that. The possibilities are still extremely wide and very diversified.
Yeah, for sure. Which is, once again, why I'd love to see a marrying of the two systems. Where, like, because there is something to be said about, like, having gear that you've crafted as opposed to gear that you just pick up. But I mean, like, some could argue that picking up gear is a whole RPG element in its own way. I don't know. Like, once again, they did something different, and like, you can't really fault the company for trying something different. But if they do so many different things at once that it feels unrecognizable, like, i.e., just really dumbing down the RPG and the conversations and whatnot, and choosing to have a voice protagonist with a distinct personality, I feel like they changed the format of the game that people were looking for. Once again, if you want to give me a pre-written character, no problem. But tell me at the very start, so I know that, okay, this is how I'm supposed to be, this is what I'm walking into. Tell me that I'm playing The
Witcher. I don't
Witcher.
remember how upfront they were about how the character and the character creation was.
Well,
I felt like there was nothing about that, basically.
I mean, it was obviously, like, you could tell that they were having a voice protagonist. Oh, sorry.
Well, yeah, it was all over the trailers, that I do remember.
And you could tell just by the fact that you are playing someone alive before the bombs that you have an established backstory. Mm-hmm. But yeah, beyond that, no, there's no indication that you're going to have 4 dialogue options and they're going to be yes, yes, sarcastic, yes, no, but actually yes.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
I mean, let's be honest, a lot, like, games like Fallout New Vegas offer a lot of, like, different flavors of yes, yes, no, and aggressive yes. They offered very different options, but ultimately it all boils down to being just that. Because they can't have you typing in your answer. They can't have you typing in your answer.
Yeah, okay, they can't have you typing in, but there's a difference between yes, 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 no, actually yes, than like yes, and these people live and die, and yes, and these people live and die.
Yeah. I agree that the Fallout 4 conversations can feel bland very often because your choice as to how you respond to situations is usually very canned, like you say. But I don't find that. How can I put this without being immediately shot down?
I could just shoot you and get you.
New Vegas gave an edge to the answers it gave, and it's certainly because it allowed a more grim outcome to situations most of the time. It allowed the character to say things that were more in line with what we expect of the Fallout universe. But the end result stays that you can say things that lead nowhere, and conversations usually end with you either agreeing, disagreeing, or shooting dead the person that's in front of you. That's just conversations in RPGs in general. That's just Fallout 4 just failed at it.
I just want to say that, like, I haven't played New Vegas, but I've watched enough gameplay and played enough Fallout 4 to know there's one thing that Fallout New Vegas does, and even 3 does a little bit, that makes it a little bit better at that whole dialogue thing, is that you tend to have these other options based off of your skill set and perks that open up possibilities that wouldn't have existed otherwise, and I think that plays into your custom character a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's something that Fallout 4 was cruelly missing. Cruelly missing. I think the only time where that comes into play in Fallout 4 is when you're playing a female character with the femme fatale perk. Then you'll sometimes get these options where you're kind of seducing your way into situations where I'm like, okay, that's an interesting approach to having social interactions that are dictated by your skills. Because I wasn't always a fan of how certain skills open some doors, because you need 25 skill to introduce the idea of using explosives to solve certain situations. Otherwise, the talk fails. But what does my being proficient with explosive help in convincing the guy that's in front of me of going through with the bombing plan. Like, I sometimes feel like there was a disconnect in why they were asking for the skill check and the result. I certainly like it because it means that your character and his responses to the world and the doors it opens are very ingrained in the choices you make and the perks you take. But usually by the late game or by the late mid game, you have enough skill in most of the relevant categories that NPCs look for to say that you always get your way and that it's just a matter of picking the one you want.
Depends on your build.
It depends on your build, and especially in, sure, yes, in Fallout 4 and in Skyrim, you can make that argument, but in older Bethesda and in New Vegas, I'd say it's not nearly that easy to do that unless you're
New Vegas
literally doing everything and maxing out all your stats, but that requires work. That's not just the default position like it is in Skyrim or Fallout 4.
And New Vegas gave the explanation that, like, if you having a 25 in explosive doesn't just mean that you match this magical skill check. Your character actually says things that they would know if they had that kind of thing. There are different dialogue options if you're too dumb or if you're smart.
And it's also if you're too little of a skill, not just too much of it. Too little of a skill, you could say really stupid shit.
And in the idea of, like, okay, you need a 25 explosives to convince this guy. Well, yeah, because that guy's probably apprehensive about blowing shit up because he's not an explosives guy. And so if you don't comfort him and convince him that you know what you're talking about, he's not going to want to throw a bunch of dynamite at a door. Like that's how you have to more look at that. And also, the base ones that, unlock those, seemingly obvious ones are very easy. Like, it's not hard to get 25 in a skill. It's more about like the higher level dialogue skill checks that are.
When you get to late game checks of like 75, 80.
Or 100. You get to New Vegas and you're like, all right, I could spend the next 5 hours doing one of 3 quests to get entrance into the strip. Or because I'm a science guy, I could just convince the robot to let me in.
Yeah.
Like, you can't tell me that's a yes, no thing. That's a dramatically different way to interact with the situation.
Like I said, Fallout 4 lacked a lot of these situations, although there were situations similar. But again, it was all hinging on that femme fatale perk, because you can get the same thing when you enter Diamond City the first time. You can either pretend that you're with Piper and that you're a tradesman. You can just walk away and then have the same conversation 5 minutes later and finally agree to Piper's plan. Mm-hmm. But if you have the femme fatale perk, I believe you can flirt with the guard to let him to open the door, which if you don't have the perk, the conversation choice doesn't even show up. The thing that was kind of jarring to me about the New Vegas way of presenting it was that sometimes a character might not be aware that he can sway the person that's in front of him using certain skill, but the player would, because you can tell that the check is there and you can tell what the number you need to meet the check is.
I mean, there are ways to disable that to show it so it only shows things you can use.
Oh, is there?
That's
is that a mod?
If it's not I think it's a real thing, but if not, it's a very easy to install mod. But yeah, I mean, I can understand that, and I can agree that they maybe shouldn't show, or at least shouldn't show the skill number required for that conversation option. But I do think there's a benefit to at least showing the options that aren't available to you, so you can just see what is available for future playthroughs.
You're missing out on. Yeah.
There's nothing that screams RPG more than starting a dialogue with someone. He says something, and then I get 7 responses to them, and 5 of them are grayed out because it's not my build.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Pick any card.
It's like, I'll have to remember that for my next playthrough, and like, I'd say arguably that's good game design right there.
Well, that's how any RPG should be designed.
Replayability focused game design for sure.
Yeah, well, any RPG should be replayable if you're providing different ways to play, like different classes. Like any game that offers you even just the basic like warrior, rogue, or mage archetype, or has any sort of charisma system, is by itself should be a replayable game, unless it's one of those faux RPGs that promises choice and consequence but doesn't actually deliver.
Or something like a more classical story-driven RPG where you're just mashing A to progress through a story until the game ends.
Yeah, that's not
Chrono Trigger was Chrono Trigger was one of the best RPGs. You get to make just about 0 decisions about anything in Chrono Trigger. You get to do side quests or not do them, but ultimately
do or not
waste
do.
Equipment. It's do or not do, but you don't get to choose who Chrono is. You don't get to choose what he does. No, he's a swordy boy that spins and He spins to win, and that's it. Like
the personalities you can't, but there's like
it's a
pretty
very
big
new
decisions.
thing.
But there's pretty momentous decisions that impact the game. The game has like multiple endings. I think Chrono Trigger for the time is like
27, I believe, is the number.
for
of
that
endings.
time. That is nuts.
That's
That they even
bonkers,
have
yeah,
that at that
All of them having to do with when you chose to go and fight the last boss and who was
So
with
many
you at that
times.
point. Yeah,
How like
because you
even,
get your first chance to go there as soon as you get to the like end of time.
yeah, it's like time travel to the boss. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, you just talk to the bucket, and it's like, are you sure you want to go to the Day of Lavos? Yes. And then you get your ass handed to you because you're like 50 levels under leveled and you're alone and like, but you can, and if you beat him, there's a special ending for that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know that okay, if we're comparing this to what we're saying, like having dialogue options, yeah, Chrono's also mute completely.
Yeah.
So like
It's the SNES tradition of mute protagonist.
But so you almost have a bit of a headcanon. Like he does things he does for sure. But even honestly, I would argue that the beginning there at the fair, you kind of are determining some of his personality.
Yeah.
Is he being
like
a
when
dick, like stealing the guy's lunch or rescuing
And then
the
you-
cat, or
Yeah, and then there's repercussions for your decisions.
you're still
So it's like-
always guilty though.
Yeah,
When you
yeah, I
get to
know.
the trial, you're still always guilty.
Yeah.
I did it pretty like I did almost everything right, and I still got canned. But it's cool that they even can like for the time also like wow they really considered all this stuff, and Chrono still does things that you have an impact on, like how like you said the side quests or whether you do or do not do them. It is a binary, but even then like wow some of the differences that side quest like your party depends like who's in your party.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like dependent on whether you did side quests or not. It's like they're almost like they're huge game-changing moments.
And because
you
of the
do
time travel mechanic, some of the side quests done in the past have a clear, visible, palpable impact on the world map. Like if you do the de-desertification, where you let Robo just plow the land for thousands of years, and then you come back, well, instead of a desert, you now have a lush forest. And you're like, well, I kind of did that. I put my footstep into the world. And that's definitely great.
But yeah, well, it's not like I know we're talking about dialogue options and like Fallout, and yeah, of course that's like many years later. But I think that like it just goes to show like RPGs have the potential to like the choices that you give the player can vary in the way that they're delivered as well. Like we're talking about dialogue options in Fallout and Skyrim and having like skills to meet the dialogue options, but like acting and not acting is just as meaningful as a choice in Chrono Trigger. Like whether you're gonna I honestly I'm trying not to like there's some really great moments in Chrono Trigger I don't want to spoil, but like yeah there's quests that if you don't do like dramatically affect things, and I love that, and I wish that was more common in and I guess I don't know because again I didn't do every quest in Fallout 4 or in New Vegas, so I don't know if there are side quests that dramatically change the dynamic of the game, but
there isn't. There isn't, but that's probably no because and that's not a flaw.
Well,
that's not
what
a
you
flaw
mean by
of
changing
them.
the entire dynamic.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Like, there's nothing that dramatically changes New Vegas, but
like,
certainly gives you new perspectives on lore and certain events, and certainly can open up.
But to have as clear a mark on the world as you can have on Chrono Trigger, it's more a flaw of the systems that are put in place and how difficult it would be to implement, more than a flaw of they didn't try. It was just it's a mastodon of a task to take something like the world of Skyrim and then say, well, that forest that's here, the action you took, we're just going to completely raise that forest. That forest is gone. Like it's certainly easier to do when the trees you're cutting down are 8x8 grids of pixels.
Yeah.
I still don't think something as small as a forest. I don't think that's that difficult to accomplish. Like it's literally just
probably not, but
it's Boolean. Like, is it forest or is it stump?
Yeah,
mode?
which one of the two cells are you loading at this point, basically?
Yeah, so
are you loading the blue flag or the red flag, basically?
Yeah, that's it. Like I'm like, I feel like that's doable. Even like a castle being destroyed or something. Like you have a raid on a castle and you blow it up. Like small things like that, and like then now there's like the ruins. Like just do. I know it's extra work because they'd have to two separate versions of something, but like that sort of thing goes a super long way in making you feel like you have an impact on the world around you. Like the megaton bomb. Like that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like that, things like that. If you don't need a million of them, just like put like a few, and it makes them even the fewer the better because it makes them feel more meaningful.
It makes them feel meaningful, yeah.
Yeah.
But
and
it's
one
something
thing,
like that.
One thing we brushed on that I think I wanted to just maybe discuss if it leads to it, and just say in passing if it doesn't. But the thing about the good old days of SNES and Game Boy and all of those games where we had the mythical silent protagonists, like the protagonist was quiet, like we didn't get to see what the protagonist was saying, but I can't imagine that the protagonist was actually not saying anything. I can't imagine that the protagonist, so to have the line spelled out on the screen like you would have playing something like Fallout New Vegas, or read out loud the way you do playing Fallout 4, I see only a slight difference. Like, sure, having no line at all, like you had in the good old days, kind of leaves open to interpretation. Like, did Chrono just approach that guy and say like, yo, what up? Or did he say anything else? Like, sure, but does it matter what he said really? In the context of a game like Chrono Trigger, no, because conversations very rarely ever have an impact on what you do. And the reason the voiced protagonist hurt Fallout 4 is because Fallout 4 was a game of social interaction, and it very much caged you into both an attitude and an opinion that was more often than not kind of not unnecessary, but it defeated the point of Fallout in many ways. And of the Bethesda games in general in many ways that I think would have been better left mute. Not silent, but mute. At least so I can come up with my own reading of the line that's being said.
Yeah.
Because I had no issue with the text of Fallout 4. Like, it felt disconnected at times, maybe a little bit, and better writing could have certainly helped polish it off. But in terms of
Bethesda game?
But in terms of playing the character that you're supposed to be playing, it all makes very coherent sense. Like, you're playing this distraught parent that's running after a child. I can very well imagine... I'm not a parent. I don't know what it would feel like. But I can very well imagine that it would turn you into this hysterical, blood-seeking monster that's just like, where's Sean? Where is my kid? Like, I can very well imagine it. I just wish I had an option in some conversations to either tone it down or push it aside a little more, because it's been 100 years. Like, get over yourself. Like, the kid's probably dead or dying.
But that's kind of like the whole point. Is like, yeah, okay, the game is tailored, its mechanics work and seem logical in the context of you playing it the one way the game was built to be played.
And that's where I agree.
The one way a Bethesda game was built to be played. Like, we're not talking about any, Witcher 3 has more ways to play it than Fallout 4, at least in regards to shaping Geralt's personality. Certain things, but even then, at least in that case, because it's a very similar structure where, in Witcher 3, your main quest is finding your adoptive daughter. But, with that, you're going in with this notion of a pre-existing character already, and so it's much easier to buy into it and just, and be along for the story, especially if you've, played the previous games or read the books. But with Fallout 4, it's a problem because that's not what the game is supposed to be. That's not what a Bethesda game is.
What I'm hearing is, I agree with you. I'm going to preface what I'm about to say by saying that I agree with you. But I'll also say that it's a dangerous frame of thought to have, because then when you become a big studio like Bethesda, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, where you're either doing what you want to do for artistic pursuit or for whatever they want to call what they're doing. You're either stuck between doing what you want to do or catering to the fans. And unfortunately, this situation is a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because unless you produce something that the fans unanimously agree was great, then they'll accuse you of not being the other thing. If Fallout 4 had been this perfect open scenario, because I can't not call it open world, it is very open world, but if it was this more open scenario where you get all of these good conversations like that help shape a character that's nuanced and different, then at some point people might say, yeah, but when are they going to tell a good story about a character? Like, are they even capable of it?
Did anyone really ask that about Bethesda though? Was that really a topic of conversation?
No, and I don't think it was wrong of them to try with Fallout 4. maybe it was approached the wrong way. Maybe it was pitched the wrong way to the fans. Maybe the fans are just salty because it's not as good as they wanted it to be.
I mean,
but I can't fault Bethesda. I can't fault Bethesda for having tried. Whether it was the opportune moment or the best way to do it, maybe not. I might have held off for, like I said, Fallout 4 might have been better off as some like offshoot game rather than a hinging title of the series. But I don't necessarily think it was a bad idea to try. They certainly. What was that, Julian?
Go
ahead.
But
I don't think it was a bad idea for them to try. I think the end result was flawed again by, like we had during our talk about the state of the industry. It looked like the game had a lot of leadership issues, and that the game suffered for it. And that had the game been better, but still what it is in terms of you're playing this character with a known backstory and this kind of attitude towards what his goal is. If the game had been better, we might have been so sour about the fact that they chose to do that.
But that's the thing, though. As I always say this, it's not a bad game. It's bad because of what it was supposed to be in comparison to what it is. Like I said, if you took that game, rebranded some of it so it wasn't clearly a Fallout game, but took just everything else game. As is.
Fallout side game, but whatever even subtitle then, you want to give it.
But even then, if you have the Fallout name on it, you're going to run into problems with the game.
There's expectations
but
that are.
If you take Fallout out and you put Far Cry on it, that's a Game of the Year contender, no question. That's the best Far Cry game out there, basically.
Yeah.
But the problem is that that's not what people want from Bethesda, and I'm all for innovation in the industry. I think we talked about this when we talked about the industry, but there's certain people who should innovate, and there's certain people who should certainly improve upon what they're doing. But you need to also recognize when you're producing something that's not just like the best of of its genre, but especially these days it's more rare. Like you don't see other games like Bethesda games anymore, because now Bethesda games are trying to be like these other games. There is a place for the Witcher 3s and the Skyrims. There isn't a place for Bethesda to try to be The Witcher. I think
there is.
Because they will never do it as well.
Maybe not in the. They'll never do it as well if they don't do it. You never get good at something you don't try.
Okay, you're right.
One.
Well, they tried and they sucked, so please stop.
For two,
so stop it.
Please tell me you learned.
I think especially when it comes to the bigger studios like this, they can do whatever they want, in the sense that if they really have a team that believes in the project, they have a leadership that knows where it's going and that knows what needs to be done, there's no reason why a big studio like Bethesda can't create a successful, good quality, character-oriented game like The Witcher or anything like this.
But then why didn't they? Then why did they fail?
Because they had, for one thing, a bunch of leadership issues. They had a bunch of misguided decisions that were done in this, and again, because it was their first try at it. I'm not willing to shoot down a studio who tried something and failed and just say, like, you should stick to what you know how to do, because in that context, big game studios are going to pump out, like, it's like Assassin's Creed. As much as I like Valheim, they had to break from the formula. Wow, where's my head?
There, right?
Yeah, it's watching you with your playing Valheim that's messing with me.
Yeah,
but as much as I loved a lot of the things they did in Valhalla, they had to break free from that. You get these contracts to go kill these people, like, down low and quiet, because it's becoming so redundant that even the people who like the series are like, can we get something fresh, please? The thing about these big open worlds, and the reason we don't see a lot of companies taking them on, is because they're huge undertakings that take years of development, and there aren't a lot of studios that can afford that time in development for a single game. Bethesda is very lucky to be awarded with that luxury of not having released a good game in decades and still have the money to produce something of the amplitude of Elder Scrolls 6.
But I have to wonder, and like this goes into a bit of what Jacob was saying, was like if they branded it differently, is that we Bethesda is making Starfield, which is going to be a new, like, their new franchise. I'm wondering if they
is the point to do new things.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
if they had tried out all these new Fallout 4 things in Starfield first, I feel like it could have avoided a lot of the negative feedback towards Fallout 4.
I think the reason they didn't want to is because they didn't want to can Starfield as being something that plays like in the sense that like they didn't want to make of Starfield this character-driven. No, they wanted to create another open-world franchise, but this one's set in a sci-fi setting. So they couldn't afford to create or waste one of their good IPs on something that might not work.
So they're using like a, but I feel like that's.
But doesn't it make more sense to put at risk something that has nothing to it than to put at risk one of the pillars of the industry as far as franchises? Like it would be so much easier for them to get away with this kind of stuff with a new IP.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and even when you talk about like other studios doing things differently, like with Assassin's Creed, I mean that was done because that series desperately needed a change, because even the hardcore fans were like, okay, we've had one game for every year for the last 10 years. Like, give us some room to breathe. We don't have that luxury with Fallout games. It was 7 years between 3 and 4, and still 5 between New Vegas and 4. So there's no reason to change that up when for half a decade we've been waiting for exactly that. You can change up Assassin's Creed because it's like, okay, like I've done this.
Yeah, there's a game almost every 2 years. There's one every 2 years.
So it makes more sense, and even then, you know, I've always said, and people say like they should call it something a little different, because
I think they should.
It isn't a true Assassin's Creed game, and I agree with that. But you have to. It's a time and a place to innovate. Assassin's Creed desperately needed to innovate because it was losing sales. It was losing popularity. People didn't want to play it anymore. After Ezio was gone, people started to lose interest. And every game that came out after Ezio, while some of them were really good and really loved, there was something missing. So they had to retool, reboot. But you don't have that problem with Fallout. If anything, we're starved for Fallout. Certainly, at least open world 3D Fallouts.
I can say though is that. And that's where I think that having Fallout 4 be more of I like to call them spin-off titles, because the Fallout universe is a great universe to be telling stories, to be telling exactly these kinds of stories. So if they did give us a Fallout 4 that was everything we wanted and more open, less committed personality and attitude choice for the main character, like name it, everything we've named as being a flaw of Fallout 4 is fixed, and this is just a better version of what Fallout should have been, and then they release this story. This is a Fallout story that happens in Commonwealth. You're playing this military guy that's looking for his kid. I think the pill would have been much easier to swallow.
Oh yeah,
because then you have a backbone to lean on, which is the dictionary that is the Fallout lore, because the Fallout lore is amazing, and I can't blame the developers for wanting to tell a story in that universe. I can't blame the gamers either for wanting what was the success of Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. I want more of New Vegas more than I want more of Fallout 4. And then Fallout 76 came out, and I'm like, what the fuck are you guys smoking in there?
What is this?
I want some because like it's wild. Like I don't know what kind of party they're having when they're developing these kinds of stupid games, but like you must wake up hungover after a day of work, because that game is jank like from the beginning to the end.
Okay, you know what? Fallout 76, I think it's pretty transparent. I know what, like, you look at it and you're like, okay, I see what happened. I really do. Like, it's like, so many people play Bethesda games and they're like, wouldn't this be fun with more people? And, like, they're like, okay, well, that's the cornerstone of what we're gonna do. Like, we want that. How do we deliver that? And, like, they misplaced their, like, their emphasis. They put emphasis on the wrong aspects of Fallout. They're like, okay, well, we'll have the big open world, we'll have all the different weird creatures, and they're like, well, we don't really, like, the NPCs aren't as important because we have people.
There were none. Like, at launch of Fallout 76, there were no NPCs.
That's exactly what I mean. Like, they said, like, okay, no NPCs because we'll have people.
Yeah, players will kind of fill the role.
We'll have players.
That was their soul, yeah.
And then that was clearly a misstep, and the problem is, like, that's a big misstep. But what makes it worse...
First of many with that game, fuck.
What makes it, but the thing, this is where and the same thing with Anthem and all these games. This is and Avengers. It's always, this is the thing that always kills it. It's like they make a big misstep, but it's not the end of the world. The end of the world is that they try to remedy it, or they add too much business sense into it, like microtransactions, live service stuff. They shoehorn that in, so then not only is the game not delivering what you really wanted, but now you have this veneer of greed on top of it.
Yeah.
And it like that is like insult to injury. It's fuel in the flames, and then people get really mad.
Yeah.
And that seems to be like what really took Fallout 76 under. It pulled it way lower than it already was. And I mean, to be fair, they're respectfully trying to do what they can do here. Like they did after a million mistakes, they are like, okay, we put NPCs in it. Okay, like they're trying to fix it.
I remember seeing an interview with Todd Howard, and he was basically saying there's nothing we didn't fuck up about the launch of Fallout 76.
Yeah, there's a recent interview.
And I'm like, as a developer, with the experience that Bethesda had, just admitting something like this should be enough to get you to cower in shame and walk away from any kind of platform where you can address the media. Because how can you, with the years of experience that Bethesda has, believe your own bullshit so much that after the launch of your product, you say there's nothing we didn't fuck up? Like, I know he meant it. I know he meant it as a bit of a hyperbole, but he's right in so many ways. But
Dan, you played at launch. Name me one thing that worked about 76 at launch.
About 76.
In game or out in any sort of capacity.
I couldn't get the game to launch.
The same character creator is for, so I don't know, man.
I really don't think it's hyperbole, because it's not just about the launch of the game itself. It's about how they. I mean, the whole controversy with the bag that came with the collector's edition.
Canvas bag,
the canvas bag that turned out to be shit.
That you can pay the same amount of money for a power armor skin than it costs to get a 40-hour expansion in The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
Like,
there's a lot going on there.
There was a lot of backstabbing on things that they had promised that they wouldn't be doing, and then when they fucking did exactly that and fucked everyone, well,
but
I mean, was anyone really surprised?
The one thing I'll say, and this goes back to what you were saying about, rebranding, is at least Fallout 76 was clearly marketed as a spin-off idea.
Yeah.
So when I'm yes, 100%.
If it was Fallout 5, it would have been game over, man. Like,
my god,
it was never meant to be interpreted as a mainline Bethesda game. It was always an experiment.
Okay, because I was about to say, it looks like at some point in their road mapping process in Bethesda's headquarters, they went, we have to take a game franchise and have it be the sacrificial pig on which we experiment, on which we go mad scientist. And they have two franchises, so they went, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, whoops, that's Elder Scrolls, we can't do that, so it's going to be Fallout.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like Bethesda, like Elder Scrolls being Bethesda's baby, I feel like when they acquired the rights to the Fallout franchise, they, from the start, had a more fast and loose idea of how to deal with Fallout, because ultimately, it's not theirs, in a sense that's like, they're reusing a lore and a world and a whatever that was built by the people from, what was the name of that studio?
Black Isle.
Yes, thank you.
Also known today as Obsidian.
Those
people were there.
A big part of the leadership group moved there. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And like, from the start, I feel like they weren't as precious with Fallout, and being precious, and that's something you'll hear a lot, in all fields of art in general, is that being precious with your art can be extremely dangerous and very toxic to your growth as an artist. And that's why I have a hard time feeling bad about how Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 turned out, in the sense that they tried something, okay? And I can always respect someone who tries something. What I'm not going to respect is the response that Bethesda gave to the critique that they got. Fallout 76 was a trash fire, and they tried to fix it so many ways, so many wrong ways, that it's just like, do you even understand what you're doing? Because it doesn't look like it from where we're standing. Yeah. Not anymore, at least. No. So and Louis, it's bad for Fallout, because it's a good franchise that had a lot of potential, and I feel like it's losing speed in the public eye because of bad decisions.
But Louis, honestly, I think that if they had chosen to do the 76 treatment with Elder Scrolls, it would have ended up much worse, since Fallout 4 at least came out a little bit before, and we haven't had an Elder Scrolls in a much longer time. So finally, people are like, "Oh, finally!"
Yeah. Oh no, people were gonna rage. People were gonna set fire to their offices. If Elder Scrolls 6 was that, Like people were gonna get like forget the death threats. It was gonna be like attempted murder. It was
exactly.
It would have been dangerous.
Definitely, I can definitely agree with you on that one. They didn't have the luxury to mess up their baby. They can't.
Yeah,
they're already facing. They're already facing. As much as Skyrim was like one of the most popular fantasy games ever produced, they're still facing very serious issues from the mostly hardcore gamer community, where it's like, we see what you did and what you tried to do in dumbing everything down, and if it worked to get eyes on the game, it won't work forever. And I think Bethesda is very aware of this, which is why they're taking so long for Elder Scrolls 6. They're waiting for the engine rework, they're waiting for water to flow under the bridge, because the gamers, like the playtime statistics of Skyrim, there's still a lot of people playing this game 10 years later.
Crazy.
Like I can definitely get behind the idea that some masterpieces are going to be played forever. I know for a fact that in 100 years people are still going to be playing Super Metroid and Super Mario. Oh yeah, no, I have no problem saying this. I know it's true. Like these classics, these cult classics are going nowhere anytime soon, especially with how available they are now with emulation and just the platform on the Switch where you can play a bunch of old games, and Sega games coming to Nintendo, like in this like arcade pack and all of that. There's a bunch of old classics that are just unkillable, and Skyrim got right close to it. But
listen, I get what you're saying, and it's true now, but I think like it's 100 years is like, I don't know. Like, I just don't know what the landscape is even gonna look like. Like
I'm telling you, man, we're still reading books and stories that were written upwards of 400 years ago because they were such classics of their times.
Like, but Shakespeare is like, it's like books are a medium that doesn't evolve the same way that technology does in games. And I know movies. Okay, we could look at movies even 100 years ago, but I don't think that like Charlie Chaplin is as widely appreciated now as he was even maybe like 50 years ago.
But if you're looking for the content, you can still find it.
Oh, it's people will. I think it's possible. Like connoisseurs will still play Super Metroid and Skyrim.
Artistic content disappears when people stop paying attention to it. And there's just certain games, and Skyrim is going to be one of them for sure, just because of how prevalent it became. Like, you can play literally everywhere. You can play on your PS3, your Xbox 360, your PS4, your computers, your fridge. I'm not even kidding with the fridge. There is a fridge that is advertised as being Skyrim ready. Like
Skyrim ready.
There's like
world.
They did what they created there was they've created a monster for one thing that you just cannot kill, but you cannot reproduce that experience ad nauseum and expect everybody to engage as hard as they did with Skyrim. And Bethesda knows this, which is why they want to take their time with Elder Scrolls 6, especially with what's been happening in terms of game launches in the past few years, not just from Bethesda, but watching Cyberpunk release something that was so wildly anticipated and that hit a brick wall that was so thick, there's no other side to that brick wall. It's just, there's no coming back. It's just crash, dead on arrival at the hospital. You just put that in a body bag and you move on. They can't afford that with PS6. Because that would be the end of their studio, like literally. They might have billions in capital just waiting to be used, but if people flack at Elder Scrolls 6 the way they did Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, it's donezo. There is no coming back from something like this, especially since like people are anticipating Starfield, like it's a new IP, it's a refreshed engine. There's a lot of expectations that come with talk like this. And they can afford to mop that one up a little bit more because, again, like growing pains of the new IP and the new engine, and people are going to show more comprehension. But if Elder Scrolls 6 is a flop, oof, that's a pretty big nail and a pretty sturdy coffin, if you ask me.
Yeah, like what are they good for at that point, if not making?
They're good at letting other people's publish their games, because all of the Doom remakes that Bethesda published were absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
If you've ever needed to rip and tear, you just play Doom Eternal and like wow.
But that's like more of a testament to like id Machine Games and Arcane are like, those are godly studios that are underneath Bethesda.
Yeah,
but that's not Bethesda. Like
no, but I mean,
them. But
look at what happened with whoever operates under EA. EA is so toxic to everything that it touches that studios just die and wilt one by one.
Well, except for Respawn.
Except for Respawn for some mysterious reason.
I think you bring up an interesting point that kind of can help us put some more blame on Todd Howard and co. and put more into question their decisions in regards to Fallout 4 among other things. Like we've seen that Bethesda as a publisher is not EA. And obviously they're giving Bethesda the time of day, so like why did we get what we got with Fallout 4? Was it like it clearly wasn't.
Maybe the people at Bethesda became better publishers than they are developers. Maybe the answer is that simple.
Maybe, yeah, but then what does that mean for Todd Howard, who was literally video game Jesus 6 years ago, before all this went to shit?
Maybe
in a lot of ways that makes me more worried because it makes me think that
Todd Howard's reputation was overdone. Maybe some of the people that were praised reputation were overdone because of people working below them that produce straight gold.
It's usually the case.
But Todd Howard was an integral part going all the way back past Morrowind.
I'm not saying he doesn't have his fair share of the credit for the success of the games that he's had his mitts in. He understands how to make a good game. At least I like to think he does, because he's participated in great projects. But as of late, there's a disconnect that I don't know if it's him, I don't know if it's people above him, because he has people above him. We gotta keep that in mind. And that's a problem that we addressed in our State of the Industry, is that more often than not, the people with the deep pockets are gonna try to get a voice into the goings of a project. And that can be extremely toxic to a developer and to an artistic group.
Like I was just pointing out, it's clearly the other developers working under Bethesda haven't had this problem.
No, because they operate based on their own rules. Like I would like to see someone go into id Software and say, this is how we're doing shit now, because he's going to be shown the door like right there.
Yeah, but if it's your publisher, you can't show him the door because he's going to take all the money out that door with him. That's the thing. If they want to impose themselves on id Software or Arcane Studios, they can, and there's nothing they can do about it if they want the funding for their game. That's why EA.
Well, they can find another publisher. Yeah, they can find another publisher for one thing.
If it were that simple, do you think EA would still exist?
The thing with EA is that EA straight up buys the studios.
That's it. Yeah, but that's what Bethesda's done too. Like they own those studios now because they fund their projects. They pull that funding, they have nothing. And sure, chances are they could get picked up by someone else, but it's probably very hard for them to leave whatever legal arrangements they've had with that company, which is why, BioWare, committed suicide 3 times and then still shook EA's hand and says, yeah, let's make more shitty games. Like,
let's make it that
easy. If it were that easy, I there's no explanation you can give to me. This is why BioWare is still part of EA. So that tells me that Bethesda isn't that oppressive as a publisher because they let Doom be a
I'm going to give some weight to what you're saying, actually. I'm going to give some weight to what you're saying, actually. Because I looked up, when we talk of Bethesda as a developer, we talk of Bethesda Softworks. And when we're speaking of it as a producer, we're talking about ZeniMax Media.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at a list of subsidiaries for ZeniMax. And there's 1, 2, 3, and then some 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 subsidiaries. And 5 defunct studios that bailed. But most of those defunct studios, like, I don't even recognize the names of, so it's old stuff, so it's not so bad. But like Alpha Dog, Arcane Studios, Bethesda Softworks, id Software, Machine Games, Roundhouse Studios, Tango Gameworks, and ZeniMax Online Studios.
Yeah, Tango as well. It's true. Forgot that's Evil Within. Which I love.
You need some place to rest. I can rent you a room for the night.
So yeah, all that saying, like, I don't think it was the guys at ZeniMax that pushed for Fallout 4 to be.
No, I don't think so.
What it became, and
they appear to be a very detached from. Like, they let the studios do their. They acquired those studios to capture that lightning in a bottle, and they figured that the best philosophy to get that is to let them do their thing, and I can definitely respect that.
I'm through talking to you.
Yeah. And it just makes me wonder what they have in mind for the future, because with Fallout 76, like, okay, I get you understand why was what it was, trying to be a multiplayer game and all that. But
it was a microtransaction media hub.
But for whatever reason, these developers, Todd Howard and co, sat down, looked at Fallout 4, and said, let's take all the things that people didn't really like about this game or that aren't supposed to be the tentpoles of the franchise. Let's double down on those, take away what few NPCs and dialogue we had, replace it with nothing, and think we're doing something good. Now, you're allowed to make mistakes, and I'm sure they've learned from it, but I seriously question their ability to make the right decisions for Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6 if that was their thought process when trying to make this game, where they're just like, let's just double down on all the things people complained about and all the things people said they didn't want in a Fallout game when we make this game.
Wait, Jacob, there's something I think there's something you're overlooking there.
Okay.
Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 didn't come out that far from each other.
No, they were probably parallel in development.
That's what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure it was too late.
Even then it's almost worse because they were so deluded into thinking that this is what people wanted from the franchise that they committed to basically two games of it without even giving it a test run. Like, that's almost worse.
But that's more likely what I think happened. They were really convinced that was the way to go.
And that makes me wonder if they have the ability and the know-how or the desire even to make the games we want them to make, to realize their mistakes, or are they just going to double down on further? Like, what, we don't know much about Starfield yet, so it's hard to have a full discussion of it, but what is Starfield going to look like?
Outer Worlds.
I hope so. I really, really hope so. That would be fantastic.
It wouldn't be the worst thing, yeah, that's for sure.
But I have my doubts, because, and again, this even furthers it. My worries for the future of Bethesda games was always and is still very much coming from what Fallout 4 was and not what Fallout 76.
That's funny because for me it was from Skyrim. As much as I loved Skyrim,
oh yeah, well it goes back. Like,
Skyrim was the smoke.
Yeah, no, it's like I was saying with the comparison.
Fallout 4 was like seeing hot embers. And then Fallout 76 was the trash can fire that I could smell the smoke of and see the embers of.
Yeah, no.
And the reason I'm worried now, and I don't know that I should be, but the reason I'm worried now is that they're launching a new IP that, well, the sci-fi setting doesn't appeal to me, but besides from that, is that because of their focus on developing that one, they're going to take even longer to develop Elder Scrolls 6. We still have not even any clue as to what their time frame for releasing that game is. It could be another 10 years for all we know. We have nothing to work with. Although if certain recent leaks are to be believed, it might not be so far away. Maybe only a measly 5 or 6 years. But what happens then if the game stinks? You've waited something like 20 years to play the follow-up to a game you love, and then you're sitting there and you're like, eh. Like, also, how bad is that?
If it's been in development for years already, and it's going to be in development for more years. The amount of money they're sinking into this is pretty scary. Like,
like sunken cost fallacy at this point. And I can definitely see if the game fails to hit the spot, or if the game feels weak, like at launch for them, I can see them trying to bank on microtransactions hard, and I think that would completely destroy what remains of their fan base.
Yeah.
I fear because Fallout 76, the way they dealt with everything in Fallout 76, to me, tells me that they don't know how to deal with crisis. They either nail it or they don't. But when they don't know what to do. Yeah, and that's why I can't fault them for having tried stuff. I don't like that they picked Fallout to be the sacrificial lamb to this trying stuff period that they had. Like, okay, Bethesda, your teenage years are done. You just stick to what you're good at now. But yeah, and I mean, I just want to play a good game, man. Like, is it so hard to just see what works of your game and produce more?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why, like, I don't think, like, you were talking about how you want them to, or you're happy to see them experiment and stuff. But that's the whole problem here, is they experimented when they didn't need to and when they shouldn't have, because
I think every game studio needs to in some extent.
To some extent,
because
but there's a difference.
I can definitely understand that you want to be that studio, whether big or small, that has the next big idea kind of thing. The idea of putting a character in a world like Elder Scrolls did and having you interact with the world in that fashion was Bethesda's original idea. Nothing had ever been done that even came close at the time. And I would like to be able to say, look at that studio. It tried something that went a bit against the grain of what they had been producing before, but look, they managed to create something new, original, and interesting. That's one of the favorite things I get to say about gaming, and I haven't had the chance to say that a lot lately, because a lot of the big AAA studios, especially the ones with a high yield, where you get almost like yearly or bi-yearly releases, like Ubisoft with Assassin's Creed. It's like every other year you get an Assassin's Creed game. It's like, okay, take a break a little bit. Try to rework your formula into something that feels fresh, because it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of what Bethesda is doing, they were trying to get ahead of the curve. They were trying to fix something that wasn't yet broken. And
they were trying to do that, and they were trying to become, like, you say they want, innovate the next big thing, but nothing, and I mean this in its entirety, nothing in Fallout 4 is innovative. Nothing in Fallout 4 hasn't been done in some other game.
Maybe the settlement building, like
Minecraft,
for something of the time, like
that's just any survival construction game.
That's just me trying to defend a game that we've been bashing a lot lately. Like, even I agree that it's not that big a deal.
If they had actually, managed to create something actually different and innovative that people just didn't like because it wasn't their cup of tea, that's one thing. But all they created was a poor man's version of The Witcher 3. With some other areas where there's more obviously it has other things, but I'm talking regards to the writing and the narrative structure and such. They created a poor man's Witcher 3. They shoehorned in a settlement system that is fun to play with, but I
think it was precursor to what they were trying to do to 76.
But
they were just testing out the.
It's not what I want in a full-fledged RPG, especially not at the apparent price we paid to get it. The combat, good job. It's the best combat Bethesda's ever created, but it's nothing special when compared to other
It's the same combat
shooters.
every other game had, in my feeling.
Yeah, and then
I don't feel like combat changed at all.
The shooting's a lot better compared to 3 and New Vegas, but is it really even comparable to shooting in games that are actually dedicated shooters and not masquerading as such? I call it post-apocalyptic Far Cry, but the shooting in Far Cry is still way more enjoyable.
Yeah, because Far Cry was always meant to be a shooter.
Exactly. But Fallout 4 tried too hard in the name of innovation, which is not the right word I'd use for it. Tried too hard to take the best of everything that had been going on around that time and put it into this game, when all it needed was just they didn't need to reinvent their wheel. They just needed to go back to their wheel and put back the things they had been pulling out over the last 10 years over the previous Elder Scrolls games. So yes, they needed innovation insofar as they needed to go back, take some of those classic and depth-filled features that make it an RPG, fine-tune them to the modern age and actually implement them. That would be innovating. Find me a way to make a game with the visual and technical demand of a Skyrim, but without getting rid of the acrobatics, because the only reason they got rid of that is because they had to make sure you didn't jump into things that weren't loaded in. The reason why it works so well in Morrowind is because there's no loading screens in Morrowind unless you go inside a building. All the cities are in the same,
or unless you play on a slow PC and then you reach the end of the cell and then it just freezes and you get a loading bar at the bottom.
But Skyrim, they couldn't give you acrobatics because you can't hop over the wall to wipe them because you need to load in.
Again, I'm gonna fly in the defense of Fallout 4, but it's really a shallow defense. But I'm looking at titles that released in the same year, and Fallout 4 never stood a chance. It never stood a chance. Grand Theft Auto 5, Undertale, Divinity Original Sin, The Witcher 3, Metal Gear Solid 5, Bloodborne, Shovel Knight, Majora's Mask 3D. There was so much good stuff at the time that if had it been a dry year for gaming and Fallout 4 released, I think our opinion of it might be a little sweeter. just because it came into it's like a drop of water in the ocean, right? It might not quench the whole thirst, but at least you get something in, you know? But in a year that's stacked like 2015 was, you can't afford to release Fallout 4 and call it good enough.
Yeah, but I'd argue even if it was a slow year, at least for me, I wouldn't change my opinion because, okay, sure, I compare everything to The Witcher 3, but I also do it with a grain of salt because I know nothing compares to The Witcher 3.
Yeah, The Witcher 3, especially coming out of you, Witcher 3 is always a dangerous...
and I recognize that, but I'm just comparing it to, you know, even the most beforehand dumbed down Bethesda game in Skyrim. Like, it's a fraction of the game that game was. It's a fraction of the game that Fallout 3 was. Again, aside from the things that it put money into that nobody wanted. No, like, okay, I'm sure you can find some people, but there weren't like scores of Fallout fans on Reddit demanding a settlement building system in the next game, or a voiced protagonist, or a linear story. I can almost
I'm gonna insist on the settlement system because I think that could have been Fallout 4's biggest strength.
That's where we're gonna disagree, because to me, it's such a fundamentally inappropriate mechanic for the type of game it is. That
are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Dude, it's a survival wasteland, and you're telling me that building a settlement isn't the kind of...
What does it actually do for you? What does it actually change?
You can build shops, you can have
but I mean,
people,
like, in the world. You talk about quests that change the world. How much does it change the world?
Like I said, it could have been one of its strongest.
But I'm saying it's not about it.
In the way that everything about Fallout 4 could have been better.
All right, let me rephrase it a bit. If you gave me a game that was great, or a Fallout game that was, if you gave me a Fallout game and you said, regardless of what this meant for everything else, that the best aspect of the game is its settlement building, I'm out. If that's their priority, I don't.
The one thing Fallout 4 did that I can say easily beats all of the other Bethesda software franchises is that it gave meaning to the useless clutter that is everywhere.
Yeah,
in this
and I can
world.
appreciate that, but that's not. I'll live with useless clutter as opposed to useless everything else.
The whole crux of making that useless clutter effective was in how you can use it to shape your character in the world. It's an interesting take on how can I make this random fork that you can pick up that's usually just inventory clutter that you drop into something that could be useful. Now, I'm going to paint a picture. Maybe Dan will appreciate this one more than you, Jacob. But let's say you're playing Fallout 4, and the settlement system is actually, like, near perfect, because I don't believe in perfection. But it's, like, about as good as the technology at the time would allow. Mm-hmm. You get the option to build a home for NPCs that can then give you quests that are unique to the fact that you build settlements that aren't just, this settlement is in danger, says Mr. Garvey.
Yeah, for like a million times.
You can add so much stuff with named NPCs that show up only if you have a settlement of X size or of X resource value or whatever. I'm not a developer. I don't care how they do it. But let's say you have a settlement system that means that going out on an expedition can be as meaningful as I'm going to free someone from a cave because it's the quest I have, or as meaningless as I'm just going on an errands run to pick up stuff I need for my settlement. In a survival setting, that option of doing quest versus doing chore, especially with Dan, you've been playing Valheim, I know.
Go ahead.
Valheim doesn't offer you a quest. It's all chores. Other than beating the bosses, it's all just you do whatever you want to do to feel like it helps your character survive. Mm-hmm. And if Fallout 4 had a better settlement mechanic where it actually helps your character survive and progress, it would be a very interesting mechanic to have to the game. But like everything else in Fallout 4, it felt like it was just shoehorned in there just to say it is. And then when people complain that it's not really working as intended, then Bethesda just scratches its head and wonders how it fucked up. It fucked up by not banking on it hard enough and investing more time into making it something actually enjoyable and useful.
I'd like to just add that I think that the settlements also could, like, lore-wise, story-wise, add a tangible change to the world in the sense that you are trying to rebuild after the tragedies in Fallout 4. That, like, you really feel like you are making a difference in this wasteland and bringing life back to it. So if the settlement system was more fleshed out, you could really, like Louis saying about having quest givers, you could see maybe villages coming more to life or thriving with the help that you're giving it. Like, it's something that could have, like, I agree, if they banked on it, could have added more. And I do think it's appropriate to have this the system.
It makes perfect sense in my opinion, more than it would in something like Elder Scrolls. You're not in Elder Scrolls to be making your own little village, but in the context of Fallout, where most of what you know has gone to shit, and just having a comfortable place to sleep is a gamble. The idea of building a settlement, like, it's the epitome of making sense. The first thing you would do in a survival setting is find food, water, and shelter. Which is, in the context of New Vegas, I don't think my character slept a single day in New Vegas.
That's a fair point.
Well, play on the hardest difficulty then, Scrub.
Oh, sure, no, but...
And it came with that. That's not a mod. That's a thing.
It did. I know it did. I know it did. But I also know that the game wasn't designed to play on that difficulty. It was tweaked to be played on that difficulty.
It's very playable on that
difficulty. It is my philosophy. I'm not saying it's unplayable, but it is my philosophy when it comes to games that the intended way to play it is on normal. Not because I'm a scrub or whatever, but because that's the intended degree of difficulty that was intended by the developers.
It's the normal. It's
the option of setting hard settings is something that surfaced in arcade games way back in the 80s, when some people got so good at them that with a single quarter they could beat the games without losing a life. The idea of increasing artificially a game's difficulty by making enemies take less damage, or making you deal less damage, or whatever the gimmick they use, more enemies or needs that you need to cater to, is artificial increase in difficulty. If it's not meant to be a part of your core gameplay like it is from the start, like in Valheim, for example, if you don't eat food, you'll have so little resources to work with that you will die. There is no way around this other than actually playing the game as intended. But taking a game like Fallout, which wasn't intended to be played with those mechanics, and adding them on top, usually brings the challenge to a place that's completely different, and usually different from the intention of the creator.
In some cases, yes. I don't know if that's the case in Fallout and in other games, because I feel like a lot of the times now the normal difficulty isn't the intended difficulty.
I feel like normal difficulty is a little easier than what they intended.
Normal difficulty is the broad appeal difficulty. Normal difficulty is what your dad or your mom, or
it's a difficulty that's designed.
Non-gaming uncle can come in and play. But you want to play a game the way it's meant to be played. There's a lot of examples, and New Vegas among them, where they have systems in place that are optional, but are certain. And I'm not talking about games where you just make it hard and then it's like Cyberpunk where you just have bullet sponge on bullet sponge. I'm talking about games where New Vegas where it actually adds the eat, drink, sleep mechanics, and there are tools in the game for those things. Like the med packs exist, the food exists, the water exists, the bed exists. It's there. Especially in a game like Fallout, if anything, it's less that the hard difficulty is artificially adding things. It's more like the normal difficulty is stripping things out of the game to make it easier for your average schmo to play. But I definitely don't agree that the normal difficulty is the intended difficulty. In some games it is, but in many games worth their salt, I don't think it is. I'd even say Witcher 3 is in that case, because if you play Witcher 3 on normal, you have no reason to touch your potions or your signs or to really do anything
besides swing your sword. The Witcher is one of those games that's very explicit about the mechanics that are and aren't important depending on the level of difficulty you play the game on. And I think that The Witcher did it great, where it's like, look, the level of difficulty is this, and these are the mechanics you're expected to know and master to be able to beat the game. And the easier you go, the less there is, until you get to the point where you select easy, and they straight up just tell you, this is if you want to experience the story without trouble.
Well, but
in a game,
in Witcher 3 is literally called just
in the modern landscape of gaming, a lot of these big games are designed with the idea in mind of being palatable to the masses of casuals. So the idea of saying that normal is a dumbed down version of what they intended to do is kind of a fallacious argument, because it defeats itself in that if the game was designed to appeal to casuals, then normal difficulty isn't a dumbing down of how it was meant to be played. It's the harder difficulties that just appeal more to the classic of the era or to how things were before, but don't necessarily restore elements of what was lost. Like there is no level of difficulty you can put Skyrim on that's going to restore like spell creation or acrobatics or any of that stuff, because the game was just designed without.
Yeah, in that case, yeah, but in the case of New Vegas, like the mechanics are there. You just need to put it on that difficulty. And I think a lot of cases it's okay, the developers want this hardcore survival mode of New Vegas to be the way it's meant to be played, but the publishers and the advertisers are like, well, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, quick question. Yeah. Did you ever get to the end of a New Vegas survival playthrough?
I did once when I was a youngin. But I was
did not, but I have, with the mods I use, bring in a lot of those. So in vanilla, no. Modded, yes.
Because that's kind of a like, and again, it's a thin line to walk between what we do for the sake of realism and gameplay and what we avoid for the sake of not frustrating a player that's just bashing his head at, like, you ventured out to go on a quest and then you misprepared, ran out of food, and now you're stuck in a death loop. That means you either have to load an old save or just die and stop your game there.
Yeah, I'm not saying
it's tough. It's certainly a tough line to walk.
But I still think
I can see the merits of that kind of, like, again, like banking hard on the mechanics that give your game its unicity. But I think that compromise of sometimes dumbing it down to make things more palatable isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, I have no problem, unless we're talking about Dark Souls, with having the difficulty options. All I'm saying is, for a lot of those games, I don't think... Okay, yes, normal is the way it's meant to be played, as far as the easiest way to get into it and experience the game overall. But as far as the way, the developers, the guys who really know built the nitty-gritty of the combat system the way they meant for it to be played, it isn't, because you look at so many of these cases where you have these normal options and just so many of the... it's not like Skyrim where, like, okay, the spell crafting just doesn't exist. I'm talking about games that have systems on systems that, if you're playing on anything less than hard, are utterly useless.
Yeah,
like,
use it.
Like I said, Witcher does this. Like, you don't need to use your potions, your oils, or your bombs, or your signs at all if you're playing on the easier difficulties. But if you're playing on the harder ones,
from using them.
Not really. There's really it's diminishing returns. Like, you're never at a point where, like, the difference in a fight, if you're playing on those lower difficulties, unless you're really, like, maybe a boss fight here or there, or something you're under leveled for. But like, you play on normal in The Witcher, you can just hold down the attack button and get through pretty much everything, as long as you're not, like, just sitting there, like, as long as you dodge as well. But you played Witcher 3 on Death March, like, you need to have the right oil on your sword. You need to take this potion to make sure that when that vampire bites you, you fuck it up and not it fucks you up. You need to make sure you have your signs set up so you can put that shield up at the right moment, or light the flammable things on fire at the right moment. It's like that in a game I've been playing recently, Dragon Age Origins. Like, I was playing it on the Xbox on normal, and like, I'm just sitting there mashing the A button when there's trap making, herbalism, bombs, lock picking, stealth, all these mechanics. Whereas you go knock that up to nightmare difficulty, and suddenly those mechanics are part of the game and necessary. And that, to me, when all the systems are in place and are being used, that's the intended way to play the game. Now, it's not like you're wrong for not doing it, because I don't play every game on hard and all that stuff. And even Dragon Age right now, I'm still on the lower difficulties, at least till I get more back into it. But I don't think that's the way it was meant to be played, as far as from a pure game design perspective. Like, yes, it's marketed to be able to play this way so everybody can play it. But if you're not making use of all the systems that exist in the game, or you feel like you don't have to, then you're not playing the game as intended.
Well, I mean, some games are going to offer more systems than what you can be expected to use in one go. Like,
no, yeah,
I doubt that there's a Dark Souls build that works effectively with using pyromancy, miracles, spellcasting.
No.
Like,
but you need to use one of them. It's like like with The Witcher, for example, you don't need to be like, you can choose, okay, bombs, potions, oils, signs. You're not going to do them all, because that's where the RPG aspect comes in. You have to make choices. But it's more like, okay, let's say you make a rogue. If you're playing on normal, like, getting the jump on things, being really stealthy, means nothing, because it's not going to be a death sentence for your character if you don't take advantage of that aspect of your build. Whereas if you're playing on hard and you get spotted before you get that sneak attack off or whatever else, then you're in trouble. And like with Dragon Age, okay, you don't obviously not going to use them all, but if you're on the hard difficulty, you got to at least have one of trap making, herbalism or something along those lines. I can't remember if there's another thing I'm forgetting, but you need one of those. Probably herbalism realistically to have a chance. Because obviously you're not going to do everything. I wouldn't want that. That's one of the things I hate about. Oh shit! I just attacked the guard. It's one of the things I hate about Skyrim is that you can be and do everything with one character. Okay, he seems to be okay with me. But I also feel like when you're, with whatever build you're doing, you have to be able to make use of everything that build is meant to do to play the game as intended.
When it comes to difficulty, I always privileged more of a Dark Souls approach, where it's like the game offers you a baseline, and then if you want to take it to another level, there's the New Game Plus, and the New Game Plus Plus, and the New Game Plus Plus Plus. I always hated the idea of the difficulty slider thing, because it really makes it hard to pinpoint exactly what the intent of the developer was. It leads to a lot of confusion in terms of what can be expected of the player. Like, if you play a game on normal, like Fallout 4, you play on normal, you usually won't have too much trouble dispatching enemies if your gun is level appropriate. Because, like, the game's math is calculated in function of, like, the enemies level up with you, and, like, the guns you find on said enemies are usually, like, of match to whatever their skill was. So if you're lagging behind on firepower, well, you just kill a stronger enemy, pick up the gun, and you're good. But when it comes to, like, implementing, like, especially in the context of New Vegas and its survival mode, like, it changes the game quite dramatically, to the point where I'm like, Fallout New Vegas Survival could almost have been an entire other game. Because it adds, like, I'm not saying it needs to be, but because it changes your approach from the very beginning. Your approach is no longer as free, because you have so many micromanagement to do on your character that progress, especially for something that's supposed to be somewhat story driven, like an RPG, like, it can hinder it and hold it back. And I agree that element of realism and that element of pushing the game to its limit in terms of what you can do to make a game not just difficult but interesting, because I do think that these survival elements make a game more interesting in many regards, it doesn't always come as a plus, because it ultimately boils down to your preference as a gamer. And I don't know that everybody would want to play something like New Vegas survival mode as much as there are people that just want to play New Vegas.
No, I agree. That's why, with most games, you want to have that difficulty slider, but I still argue that New Vegas, as it was meant to be, is that hard mode, because I can promise you, if someone ever gave Dark Souls or Bloodborne easy, medium, hard difficulty options, normal is not what we're playing.
No.
No.
God, no, but is that coming from us being experienced players of the franchise? Or is that coming from us being
what Dark Souls can never pass as the normal difficulty setting in a game that isn't, blatantly trying to just be difficult. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, if anything, it's what made it what it is. Yeah. This difficulty, this otherworldly difficulty, this unapologetic difficulty.
That's why I would, die a little inside if Elden Ring or any other future From game ever actually gives difficulty options beyond Covenants and New Game Plus.
Something out of a nightmare came right over the walls.
All right. Well, we got a little off track there, but I have something to kind of...
I don't even remember where this started, so...
Me neither. We'll have to go back and watch. Let's bring it back around to Bethesda and kind of touched on this a bit, but let's make it a more concise answer from everybody. what do you expect from Starfield? Both
Nothing.
in regards to what do you expect personally, like your personal expectations for the game, or what you would want the game to be, let's say, and what do you actually think is going to happen? So even if you don't have any expectations,
my answer is going to be a bit of a cop out of giving an answer, but that's my approach to gaming and like just following media about gaming in general. I expect very little because I've read about nothing about what this game is supposed to be. So I'm expecting to pay $79.99 for a Bethesda game happening in space. That's what I'm expecting.
Okay, but
that's the way I manage my expectations. I expect to see a game. I expect
what is a Bethesda game in space to you? Because Fallout 4 and the things it does is not a Bethesda game to me. So like it's more like, because you can't just say a Bethesda game in space, because what does that mean now?
I mean large explorable surfaces with places to go in and out of, with items to pick up, with some degree of crafting, whether it be on a spaceship or a spacesuit or whatever. I mean, it's the almost classic at this point of almost D&D just adaptation, where you go from someplace that's safe to someplace that's not, killing things that are in the way, and talking to people that are not always enemies. Like, I try to keep my expectations as simple as possible, because the few times I've had very concrete expectations about a game, I was disappointed. And I think that's a problem that we brushed on when we spoke about state of the industry, is that maybe people expect too much and can't just patiently wait to see. We spend more time talking about what we expect out of games than about what we actually got. Well, maybe that's not so true, but I think there's a lot of ink being spent on talking about our expectations, and I don't think that always serves the games that we end up playing. So I try to keep it at a minimum. But when I say I expect a Bethesda game, open spaces to explore, and where I can expect to find some degree of opposition and loot, I expect some form of crafting or another, because it's been in the games. Like Elder Scrolls 2 had a crafting system, or very like bare bones crafting system, but you could still craft spells. The speedrun makes ample use of it if you want to see something fun. It's almost the cliches of having to pick certain skills that you're going to be better at, either because you use them or because you picked them at the start of the game, like as a class creation, although I don't think that's ever coming back. No. Skyrim pretty much set a standard to say classes are dead, you can do what you want when you want. It's just a matter of getting better at it. I can dig that.
The problem with that is doing whatever you want quickly becomes doing what they designed the game to do and nothing else.
I mean, you can make it. That's on you. Like, you can definitely
not in Fallout 4. In Skyrim, Skyrim has it, but like,
well, in Fallout 4, like ultimately you pick a gun, you're going to be using a gun.
Yeah, but all the guns feel the same. All the guns play the same. That's the problem. At least with Skyrim, you have like magic and different types of weapons, from swords to hammers.
Yeah, but in Skyrim, most of the weapons feel the same, and all of the magic feels basically the same. You can't say that Skyrim's gameplay makes you feel that every weapon is kind of unique. Iron sword, a steel sword, an ebony sword.
But I feel like there's better contrast between different play styles. You know, like, okay, all the spells in of themselves may feel the same, but at least for me, there's still a difference between playing as a mage and as a sneaky archer and as a Nord Viking. Whereas Fallout 4, like, I tried with energy guns and they felt the same as the regular guns, and like, okay, obviously you feel different, but that's like, compared to other games of that promote this kind of, or other Bethesda games, like, I feel like it's the least
I'm trying to make sense of how you would make guns feel different from one another.
Have them have more interesting effects, like, plasma guns and laser rifles are different in the older games. Like, they feel different. They have different damage modifiers. They have different effects. And to me, especially in New Vegas, like, going around with a Tesla cannon is a hell of a lot of a different experience than going around with an Old West lever action or a 6-shooter, or going around with your fists or a hammer or something. Whereas in Fallout 4, it was, I don't know if it's right to say it all felt the same, or as much as it just was so clearly one avenue of gameplay was prioritized over the other. And that was just pick up this gun and aim down the sights and shoot. Don't worry about what color the bullets are. Don't worry what the bullets are made of. Don't worry about any of this stuff. Just pick it up, aim it, and shoot. Whereas at least
play again on the harder difficulties. There is a bit of difference. I'll tell you that much. For having played Fallout 4 quite substantially, it shows better that there's a difference when you play on the harder difficulties, because then damage resistance comes into play a lot more. Like using an energy weapon on a robot is going to get you better results than using projectile weapons. And like you start to see a shade of it. I agree with you that they played it down compared to what New Vegas did. I disagree that Skyrim's weapons and sneaky playthroughs and magic playthroughs feel different, because you're ultimately expected to, like, there's certain situations that the main story puts you through that not being sword and board is more likely going to get you killed than anything else. If you're bad with swords, beating the last boss is going to take you forever, because the only way you can deal damage to him is by using a sword.
Yeah, and I can't argue with that compared to older games, but I'd say Skyrim at least does a much better job of distinguishing. And maybe it's just visual, because at least spells look a lot different and archery and stuff. But like Fallout 4 has that same issue, just worse. Like, and my worry is, what's that going to mean for Starfield or Elder Scrolls 6? Because, and I think one of the main things we can all agree on is every iteration of a Bethesda Studios game is a bit less than the previous one,
because they're trying to appeal to more people. Always.
Yeah, but where's the cutoff, and how is that going to affect Starfield? Because if Starfield,
I think the cutoff was Fallout 4 actually, because a lot of the recent news that I've been getting about leaks on Elder Scrolls 6 talk of completely revamped systems that I hope means that they're re-injecting a bit of complexity into them and a little bit of meaning into them. I hope that's just me reading between the lines. I know nothing.
The thing, it could go one of two ways. Does that mean they are looking back at some of the things they've moved past from and re-injecting depth to the spell casting, making it so you can craft spells again? Or are they doing like they did with Fallout 4 and not even looking at what they used to do and just trying to find something new, even if it isn't what the game should be built towards? I hear that Elder Scrolls 6 is doing all these things. Like, well, I fucking hope so. It's been a decade since Skyrim, and every game that's come, well, not every game, but a lot of games have come out since then that do the things Skyrim did but better in a lot of ways. So it has to be more than just, oh, you're doing things differently. Like, okay, well, I hope so, but it's like, okay, are you going to reintroduce the things that you've taken out and reintroduce the depth to these things that work, or are you going to continue to ignore those so you can shoe in a settlement system or some other equivalent? Because look, I agree, building a settlement and such obviously has a place in a survival post-apocalyptic setting, but I feel like Fallout 4's inclusion of it wasn't because they felt like this is the natural next progression of our game. It's like, what's super popular? Minecraft, put it in the game.
I disagree. I as much as they might have rushed the decision to integrate that idea into a game, a settlement system in a game like Fallout is obviously the next logical step, because you can only tell so many stories. I don't think it was. Not with the execution that they had on it. I can agree that the way Fallout New Vegas became so good is that it's forgive the pun, but it stuck to its guns and stuck to what worked.
Yeah, and
it created a gritty story in a core world, and it just very unapologetically, like, this is the world and the world is shit.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
And that's that's just what I want. Like,
and I do agree.
You look at Bethesda, you take all like their games, the core aspects of their great games. To me, and this is obviously up to each individual person, but to me, there's plenty of things missing, like, in each game, so to speak. But the core aspects of what makes a Bethesda game are there. And from my perspective, all they need to do to really nail it, with whether it's Starfield or Elder Scrolls 6 or what they could have done with Fallout 4, is just to take those pillars of their games and just, instead of stripping them away to make room for game mechanics from other franchises, regardless of how well they may or may not fit, they should instead focus on reintroducing the depth that those mechanics had.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a difficult question. Would you really wait, and that goes for everybody, would you really wait upwards of 10 years to play the same game with better graphics?
Well, that's not what I want, though. I don't want Skyrim with better graphics. I want Morrowind with Witcher 3 graphics. That's what I want. That's what I'm saying.
So you would wait 20 years to play the same game with better graphics. Whether it be
compared to Morrowind, yes. If you gave me Morrowind, if you remastered Morrowind, I'd buy that over Elder Scrolls 6.
Oh, that bad, huh?
Oh, Morrowind is like, as far as, you know, when we talk about RPGs, you don't get more RPG than Morrowind, not just within Bethesda's library.
I can agree. I can agree.
As far as just RPGs in general. I'll make it as clear as possible. Like, my hopes and dreams for the Elder Scrolls 6 is Morrowind with the technology of whatever freaking decade we're in when it comes out.
And that's where I disagree.
Because
I agree that Morrowind
do
was
other things, but this is what Bethesda's good at, and we haven't had a truly good Bethesda experience, you know, since Skyrim.
I think the one thing you're omitting in that reasoning is that this is what Bethesda was good at that time.
But what are they good at now if not that?
I don't know. I don't know, honestly, because most of what they've published in the past little while was garbage.
Yeah, because I don't think they've lost what makes them good. They're just moving away from it, because at the end they fought for, like, it's the Commonwealth. It's still a great game world. It's still a great map. It's still got that exploration factor. It's just they put less emphasis on expanding that and putting more on, you know, settlements and voice protagonists and stuff that, you know, I still think they're more than capable of making the game they used to be able to make. They're just not doing it because they feel like they have to become more like what other big games, you know, at the time, like Witcher around the time of Fallout, and, you know, whatever, you know, else you want to compare Starfield to today. Like, they I don't know why they're trying to be something else. We talk about innovation in the industry. We want people to try things, and that's great, because what's the main reason we want people to try things? Is because we want new, exciting experiences that we didn't maybe know we wanted or couldn't even fathom before. But in Bethesda, in trying to do things differently, they're just doing what other people have done. And again, even if you say, okay, the settlement system was great, blah, 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 makes sense, it's still a mechanic. It's not innovation. That's just, you know, taking an idea that already exists and putting it in a game, which is fine. But that's not true innovation then. That's just,
like,
you know,
because what if there was a mechanic from a game that we can't make that bridge in our heads of, yeah, that mechanic would be cool in an Elder Scrolls game, until we actually have it in front of us and go, wow, I really like what they did there. That really adds something. You'll never know what you're missing out on until you find it. And the danger with taking something like a studio like Bethesda and saying, I just want more iterations on what Morrowind was, is that you're missing out on the what if they had tried something that made it better.
Okay, but we've seen that. We're in that timeline, and it wasn't
We've
better.
seen them try some things.
Yeah, and
we've seen them try some things, and
they've spent the last decade, and all they've given is what they've tried, and it's by and large,
okay.
Like we talked about. Like, I'm not saying like if we were just coming out of Skyrim and we were having this discussion about Fallout 4, then maybe it's different. But the part of the why I'm so adamant on them just doing what they do right is because they tried and they failed to do things they don't do well, and they proved why they don't do those things because
I just don't know how long a studio that publishes as little as Bethesda, I just don't know how long they can keep sticking to what works. Until people start calling them out on, okay, but when are they going to have an original idea?
Well,
the reason we feel
it takes
so
a lot.
strongly
Look how many
in what
Assassin's
we're
Creed games
now,
it took before that happened to Ubisoft.
But people have been complaining about how samey the Assassin's Creed games were getting, like, for years.
Yeah,
it took them forever to acknowledge those critiques.
Yeah, but at the same time, they were still racking in money, so it's not like Bethesda, like, I don't feel like it would be a financial risk to not innovate. If anything, it's proven to be a financial risk to innovate, because all the sales they got on Fallout 4 is off the past, not off the future.
Of course it should be a risk to innovate. There is no safety in trying things. That's the whole point of trying. Living a whole life in safety is boring. both as a developer and as just a regular average Joe.
Sure.
Making your everyday life hinge on what works always. Like, I can very well see that, and maybe Julian can get into it on that one. I can very well see the people whose job it is to develop games get really tired of just remashing the same formula.
I don't think I have enough development experience, but I think that if I had like my own studio, I'd probably try to push some boundaries, obviously. But I think that every game has to. I think it's an expectation of games in general to innovate something, right? Like, because what's funny is that Jacob really wants a remaster of Morrowind, for example. But the thing is that I bet one of the reasons you want a remaster of Morrowind is because some of the things Morrowind does is stuff that you don't really see in games these days, like the amount of onus the player has on figuring out what to do. Yeah. It's a lot of work on the player, and that would almost be seen as an innovation nowadays because it's something that's not used anymore.
The most innovative thing a company can do is to make a game with depth again.
That I agree. That I agree.
There are things that don't see anymore.
Yeah, like we're at a point where, they've moved so far away from the things I'm talking about, where it would be innovative to do that. What's not innovative is trying to, you say it's boring, then why are they trying to make games that already exist? Like I said, there's nothing inherently in Fallout 4 that's innovative to the industry or to the genre. Nothing. It's all average to above average systems put under a Fallout banner.
It's innovation on their part. Like, it's not industry revolution level of innovation, but it's certainly taking the idea of leaving the player make its part in the world and leaving its footprint to something that these big open world RPGs had never seen before. We had seen it in games like Minecraft, but Minecraft isn't an open world RPG. It's a sandbox. It's expected of a sandbox to produce this kind of experience. But in terms of an open world RPG allowing you to build not just like a few huts and a few things in very specific locations like in Valhalla, but in straight up making your own dumpster fire of a container bin settlement where everybody's living in a trashed container that's a bit off-centered and like there's stuff clipping through everything everywhere. But the idea at the time for an open world RPG was unseen. There was nothing like this in an open world. They were the first to try. They failed hard. I don't know that they failed hard, but they certainly didn't hit the mark that they were setting for. Like, it was unseen, and that's why I want to give them the credit for trying, and where I remove that credit for not banking on it hard enough. Because as much as I would too enjoy a bit of a Morrowind rehash with better technology like today's graphics, how much of that is because the innovation that they've tried failed? If their innovation had succeeded, you'd be waiting for Elder Scrolls 6 like, I can't wait to see what they do next. But we've gotten so jaded about innovation in gaming because we usually just shoot it down, like, before even giving it a chance, that we'd rather just play it safe, like, stick to what works. And I think that's... Yeah. And I think that's a bad philosophy. I think that's a philosophy that leads an industry to staleness. We've seen the same kind of thing happen with a bunch of other things, from television to movies to music. Like, listen to pop music and tell me there's been innovation in pop music for God knows how long. Like, no, it's the same catchy beats with the same 3 chord progressions, and like, it's samey because it works, but that's not quality product. That's just like mass marketed, like candy store kind of product that you just like, if you can get the sale, then you're done. You've done your job. And I think that's bad, especially in the modern framework of gaming, because we're aiming more and more towards these continuous development games, and you cannot rely solely on how your game performs at launch.
No, but I'd say, if anything, what you're describing is what Bethesda did with Fallout 4. Because they took popular game mechanics, popular things. They literally... Fallout 4 is a pop song masquerading as an RPG. Because, okay, sure, it's innovative for the concept.
Or played to like some cheap pop music. That'd be funny.
Yeah, because like everything that Fallout 4 does differently. Like, again, I'm not, maybe it's a lot to ask, but okay, sure, they were the first, open world RPG, like use of the
ARPG, action RPG.
That had like a full-fledged settlement building system. Sure, but the whole idea of a settlement building system is a very, very popular mechanic. Not just from
was
Minecraft,
it in 2015 though?
Absolutely. Minecraft was came out
Minecraft
like 7 years old at that point.
Not an RPG.
Yeah, but the mechanic of building settlements, of building up your just building and
again, I'm looking
materials. It's
if you look at the titles that launched in 2015,
well, you can't just look at what came in that year
and a little
before
and a little before, you'd see that this mechanic, other than Minecraft, is all exclusive to sandbox games or survival games like Ark. Because I'm looking top 10 best-selling games of that period. Like, you get City Skylines, which is a city sandbox. You get Ark, which is a survival sandbox-ish. And then you get Fallout. Those are the only games in the top 10 best-selling games that have even some form of settlement building. Besides that, the landscape for actually building in a world was kind of barren. Ark was one of the first big games to offer the level of complexity when it came to building that it did. The reason a lot of people rushed towards Ark and spoke about it was because of, look, you can build a house like tile by tile, wall panel by wall panel. Not just putting blocks in a way that makes it into a house, but like straight up. And then Valheim went one step beyond by introducing like structure and like structural requirements for your buildings to hold. Like, it wasn't a very widespread mechanic at the time, so I can't fault them for having missed. I can't fault them as hard as you do for missing that mark, because they tried something, and I just don't think the tech was ready for it. I think they tried something that their engine wasn't ready for, and you can taste it when you experiment with that mechanic. But I still think it was a ballsy move to try.
Sure, but they just... Sorry, I had a thought in my head. I just lost it.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It was literally there for a second and then it left. But they tried it, but no.
If I may, because I remember.
Yeah, you haven't been saying anything for like a past
I've been the Louis and Jacob podcast for the last half hour.
Yeah, the two of you have just been like fucking vicious wolves at each other's throats.
I get very passionate about that subject.
Yeah. So, I'm going to take the middle ground here and say that you're both right, and then describe as to why that's the case. Louis, you are entirely right that they tried to innovate and put something that, albeit was popular with Minecraft at the time. So Jacob, you're totally right about that. There were better examples of it, but there were zero examples of that happening in what was considered to be an RPG or an ARPG or whatever the hell you want to call it. So it was innovative in that sense, and if it had worked properly, like Louis was saying, if they had made it a more integral part of the game, where like different things would happen based off of, like, don't just put it in for fluff. Don't have it in as like a cosmetic mechanic that doesn't really affect gameplay, aside from like just kind of player satisfaction in that sense. Do I think it was necessary? Not necessarily. And on one hand, while I understand and totally appreciate the fact that game developers should kind of have that right to kind of be creative with what is frankly at the end of the day first and foremost their game. At the same time, if you're if you're an indie company and you want to try to develop your style and whatnot, go for it. If you're a huge company, but like Bethesda, that has hundreds, if not thousands of employees who rely on a paycheck and your last 2 games have been shitting the bed, well, fuck innovation. It's time to go back to what sells. And pray to God that you haven't upset your customer base that much that they will even like look at it.
And I can perfectly agree with you that for Bethesda specifically, now is the time to stick to something that works, just so that they can reassure their fan base that, look, we still know what makes our success and how to do it, but I don't think that is the way they have to deal with the future, like looking long run. Yes, for Elder Scrolls 6, and to a certain extent for that new franchise.
Fallout 2, man, honestly.
Like, they definitely need to like anchor themselves into like a security both for the fans, for the employees, for everybody involved, and that, look, we still know what we're doing. We're still gonna try to find ways to innovate, and we're still gonna fail sometimes. The right to fail is one of our most to try and fail is one of our most basic human rights, at least in the Western world. The right to fail and make mistakes is one of our most basic human rights, and I'm not about to look at a big studio and make it exempt of that right just on behalf of how big they are. One thing I have to agree with you, Jacob, though, is that they can't keep trying if it means they're failing all the time, and they can't keep trying these things that wander away from what they were good at if that means that they're alienating their player base on behalf of some ludicrous idea of creative expression on behalf of the studios. What I would like to see is a more concerted effort towards innovation, in the sense that Fallout 4, when it came up with the settlement building system, it had an idea. And that's where, again, Fallout 4 could have been a spin-off game called like Fallout Settlements. The same way they had what was the game on the phone that they launched right before Fallout 4?
Fallout Shelter.
Oh, that was Fallout Shelters. Fallout Shelters was a great game.
Yeah.
I loved it. It was amazing.
You know, like shit.
Building your own vault, which is one of the expansions of Fallout 4, it was amazing. And that expansion of Fallout 4, I don't know if you guys ever got into it, but it's actually a lot of fun. You can start to taste what they wanted to do with that settlement building system when you do that that making a vault whole line. And that whole vault quest line in Fallout 4's DLC is actually like a lot more true to what Fallout was, because your overseer is a ghoul, and like you're experimenting on the people of the vault. Like you actually have experiments that you gotta run, and some of them are really wacky. Like you're always experimenting on the same guy too, so the guy becomes a bit of a running gag. But like you can start to see that the idea, the fundamental, the vision was good. It's the execution, the engine just wasn't ready for it. And that's where I'm like, that's why I don't want to count Fallout 4 as being just bad because it wandered away from what Fallout was. I think pandering is dangerous wherever it is. And I think as much as it would have made the game maybe a little better and a little bit more agreeably, unanimously better in terms of what the fan base is seeing and experimenting, for the studio, it's symptomatic of stalling. And stalling is bad because once people start speaking of your game as being last gen's way to do it, and you haven't gotten used to trying and innovating, that's when you kind of get stuck in the mud and wind up with things like Andromeda, which tried things like, let's just try to, like the story, like we've killed a story with like 12 gauge behind the head, like point blank range. So let's not try to salvage our ability to write a story or to pretend like we can, and hinge on gameplay. And if you play Andromeda with only in mind the idea that they were trying to ameliorate gameplay, and then maybe get back to writing big stories on the shoulders of that better gameplay, then you start to see that Andromeda wasn't as bad a game as everybody paints it to be, because the shooter dynamic of it, and just the overall dynamic aspect of wandering the world and of its combat, feel much better and feel like precursors to something good. Whereas what they did with Fallout 4, they tried a bunch of different things all at once, and maybe that was their mistake. It was that like shotgun approach of fixing a bunch of things that weren't broken all at once.
That's why I don't give them a lot of credit, because I feel like they just sat there, brought a list of popular game mechanics, regardless of genre, and just jammed them in there. Without thinking as to how they would interact with each other, as to how they would affect the core gameplay mechanics of the game as they were. And
sometimes the best way to know how all of these elements are going to interact with each other is to actually do what they did and integrate it all in a game and see how it works.
But that's something you should still be able to test and figure out if it works internally before you release
I agree, which is why, again, the biggest gripe, or I think the biggest issue that I can point in terms of Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 and Fallout 4, I believe there was a whole book written about that, is that Fallout 4's leadership led to the demise of that ship. It wasn't the people doing the job. The people doing the job were just trying their best to meet what was demanded of them. But apparently the management of the project of Fallout 4 was a clusterfuck from the beginning to the end. people weren't talking, they were working in really closed, which is why a lot of the playthroughs, like if you're doing Railroad versus Brotherhood, it feels like such a disconnect in tone and an approach to the game world. And like, because the game was flawed from a developmental standpoint. It's an issue we're starting to see a lot with these huge studios where developmentally speaking, that was a hard one. Developmentally speaking, the task of creating these huge games is becoming harder than it has ever been, because the teams are bigger, the money involved is bigger, the engines are more and more complex because the hardware it's running on is getting increasingly more complex. So it's definitely a rough time to be in the gaming industry, and it's probably why we're seeing a lot of indie studios rising up, is because there's a lot of these big studio gimmicks that they're not trying to get behind. They're not trying to innovate by bringing you the next best, like, social interaction system or whatever. They're taking something that worked before, giving it just an interesting twist, just twisting the knob just a little bit. But not all of the knobs like Fallout 4 did. Just a few of them. And then giving you something that works. And then, okay, so that worked. So how can I bank? And then they move on and they progress. A good example I have of this is Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight didn't try to innovate on graphics. It's side-scroller, like Mega Man, Castlevania, name it. Like, all the examples are there. And then where it tried to innovate was in publishing DLC that changed some of the fundamental mechanics. Like, they introduced a character that he can jump, and then when he gets in range of certain items, he can attack towards them, but in a fashion that would give an upwards or downwards momentum. So you kind of have to approach, and the levels were designed according to having to understand, like, okay, so I can reach that ladder there either by walking under it, jumping and climbing, or if I want that collectible that's hidden in the corner, I can try to dash my way through the enemy to go and pick it up and then proceed to go on. But they did so in small increments that completely changed how the game works. One of the characters can't jump on his own. He's got to dash into things, and then he goes up on impact. So they try to change few aspects little bit at a time and see how it works, and adjust little bit at a time. Fallout 4 was a failure because they tried to change too many things at once. Let's pretend Fallout 4 respects the silent protagonist of New Vegas that everybody seemed to love. It uses the same RPG system of having like science and energy weapon and repair as separate entities of stats that go up as you use them. And the only new thing they introduced was the settlement building system. Then it might not feel so out of place, because it might feel like, okay, that's the next thing they want to bring to the Fallout universe. It's the idea of the player making himself home. Not just finding a house that you call home and ditching everything into the same crate until you realize that those crates are reset every 7 in-game days.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
and
man.
then having to just buy a location because it's the only home that the player can afford to have. No, you can actually make one of your own. Like, for me, like, the idea of being able to do that is great. It's grand. The possibilities become so vast. The execution was sloppy. But the possibilities entailed by it are what's interesting in me. I like a game that's able, even if it fails, like I played Outward recently for the sole reason of wanting to see they did something very different with how magic works in that game. And I wanted to make the experience of it myself. The rest of the game is kind of trash for other reasons, but like it's a difficult game to get into. But for the sake of experiencing these new mechanics, I forced myself through it. And although the mechanics weren't as flamboyantly executed as I wish it was, it still became food for thought for both my own attempts at creating systems and for what I can expect to see from other systems. Because they brought in ideas that were completely novel that I haven't seen in any other games. So the idea that a big studio this time tried something different, I'm not going to judge. What I am going to judge is the execution, and the execution was downright sloppy. I have more of an issue with the execution of experimentation than with the experiment itself.
Yeah, I mean, can't argue it. Like, at the end of the day, if they had done what like you just described, then like I don't hate the settlement system in of itself. I hate the way it's perceived, because I see it as,
as fluff.
Existing on the blood of the mechanics that any Fallout game I feel should have, and again, on top of the other design choices they made with the protagonists and stuff. Like you're right. If it was more piecemeal, it's mainly just that I look at what was lost and I look at what was gained, and it's not worth it. And that's
that math I can agree with.
Like, innovation is great, but innovation is not worth it if you destroy the property in the process of innovating it.
And I mean, the same can be said about the way we live in the modern world now. We've never, as human beings, innovated so much so quickly, but look at what cost this has both on us as humans and on the environment around us as a living ecosystem. Like, that innovation is coming at a cost, and I feel like more often than not, especially when it comes to AAA gaming, innovation comes at a cost that a lot of people aren't willing to pay.
Yeah, and again, I feel like, innovation has a time and a place, and of all the developers
Agreed.
to innovate, I felt like Bethesda was one of the last ones that needed to, as of the
release of Fallout 4, it didn't really need to.
And there are other, even then, like, you can make it work and stuff, but if you're going to innovate, you should, your franchise, focus on like one thing, especially if they're all big things, because cue the necessary Witcher plug, but Witcher 1 and 2 are linear structured RPGs in the vein of like Dragon Age and
Final Fantasy 2 to 15.
Yeah, because the first two aren't open world like at all. They're closed environments after closed environment after closed environment, and then The Witcher 3 went open world, and that like with kind of the other things I've been saying. Okay, yeah, they're taking a popular thing, but they managed to introduce the concept and not only create one of the best open world games ever, but they did it without sacrificing the core tenets of what makes the Witcher games the Witcher games.
Because of how being open world complemented the rest of those mechanics.
In some cases, but in some cases, it was more like they could have dropped a lot if they wanted to, if they wanted to be Bethesda and scummy, like in the name of an open world. Because most of the time when you think open world, you don't think, at least more often, at least especially back then, you don't think grand, depth-filled characters and dialogue and a story. It's
if anything, you're expecting the copy-paste dialogue of
exactly.
I don't know why I'm here.
Yeah. But Witcher 3 managed to marry an open world with a still fantastically deep and involved story, arguably even more involved than the stories it told in the previous games. So there's like, if you're gonna do it, you have to
go hard or go
hard,
home.
And you also, and this is where the main problem is. It's not just go hard, go home, because the system is not quite lives up to hype, but one thing. But the last thing you can do is sacrifice what I'd consider to be core tenets of your franchise. There are certain things that you need in a Witcher game. There are certain things you need in a Fallout game. There are certain things I'm sure you need in a Mega Man game. But and you need to keep those things intact while innovating. If your innovations destroy those tenets, then stop, make a new IP, or just scrap the whole idea, because it's never going to be worth it. Again, unless you're like in a situation where like Assassin's Creed, where everyone's just so burnt out on the core tenets of the game that you just have to do something different.
That's the issue with releasing as often as they do.
Exactly, but Bethesda doesn't have that problem. They've released 1.5 games in 10 years.
1.5 games.
Yeah.
I think that the whole settlement mechanic building could have been the idea behind Fallout 76. It should have been what Fallout 76 was for. You want a world with no NPCs? Don't make it a world with no NPCs. Make it a world with no NPCs to begin with. And then build a settlement and see NPCs slowly start to show up as they have a place to be.
Which is actually funny, because having played Fallout 76 like a little under half a year ago, they actually started to implement that. They were like, you do a little quest for a guy, there's a station you could put in your settlement, and suddenly they end up there, and they're an NPC, they could sell stuff.
I started playing Fallout 76 when they introduced that, but you can't fix something that's as broken as Fallout 76.
No.
But yeah, to finish up the question I had asked, and every week we're like, let's be more focused. And
right?
Yeah, Starfield to me, like, okay, Starfield, it's different because it's a new IP, and I'd be a hypocrite if I said don't innovate at all, because it's completely new. And I also really am curious to see how they can make their kind of game, because you can't really make a sandbox open world a la Skyrim or Fallout in a game that takes place in space, unless you're telling me this is No Man's Sky again, which is just don't, because it's not going to work. So for Starfield, it's hard to say, but some things I would still want to see. Again, it's hard to say until we actually see how they're marketing it, and maybe they'll be just straight up, this is what we're doing. But as far as what would give me hope for the future of Elder Scrolls 6 is a return to not a voice protagonist, not a established backstory, actual diversity in outcomes for your dialogue and decisions, as well as diversity in gameplay mechanics that can make multiple playthroughs feel different from each other and unique. But then in regards to Elder Scrolls 6, unless there's something that happens with Starfield that changes my outlook, which would be great, because that would mean it's something special. But assuming that's not the case, all I want from Elder Scrolls 6 is an Elder Scrolls game with modern sensibilities. That's all I want. It's from my perspective the easiest thing they can do, and I think I'm not nearly close to alone or even in the minority in feeling.
No, because even I agree with you. Like
they just need if Elder Scrolls 6 is to Elder Scrolls what Fallout 4 is to Fallout, then unless Starfield was something incredible along the way, then Bethesda is all but dead.
Over, frankly.
That's why I also feel like it's very important that Starfield, even though it can get away with doing certain things differently and stuff because it's a new IP and space and all that, it's still so important that it also at least shows that the company still cares about those core tenets of an Elder Scrolls or a Bethesda game, because they need to show that they actually do after what they've done over the last few years. There's a lot riding on Starfield. And it's a shame because it would have been the best example to innovate, but since they blew their load into Fallout 4, they no longer have that luxury, because if we get another half-baked jigsaw puzzle of different game mechanics from different games that doesn't really feel like its own thing again, I don't know. It'll make me extremely worried for the Elder Scrolls 6. Julian, say something.
Hi.
Please.
About Starfield?
Anything we've been talking about. I want to hear your voice.
Sure.
I know we've been drowning it out, but please.
No, it's okay. I was listening. So what my expectations are and what I think we'll get. Realistically, I have no reason to believe that Starfield will be too different. I really envision Outer Worlds, but with the environments being smaller Bethesda-esque maps. So whereas Outer Worlds, it's I find them quite small.
Yeah, they are.
I think that Bethesda is more likely to make them the different biomes you'd see in Skyrim. This is my expectation. This is what the closest thing I can envision is at its base. It's just okay, you have a ship that's your hub, kind of like in Outer Worlds. Because how else are you going to get to other planets? This is just my logic. Then you're going to have planets that are the equivalents of the kingdoms or the areas of Skyrim. So you have yeah, exactly. So you'd have different holds being different planets. I mean, this is also 10 years later, so there could be other innovations to the fact they could maybe be really big. Maybe each place is the size of Skyrim, but I feel the depth would be lost at that point unless they really innovate.
Yeah, that would be intense.
Yeah, it would be a lot, and I think it might be too much at that point. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I have to say, this is my biggest, the things that's the most interesting, and I think it's the space with the most possibility for innovation, is when I think about Elder Scrolls, for example, and I think of enchanting, alchemy, a lot of the little systems that make your character a little more unique and make possibilities to break the game and personalize your character. I'm wondering how they can make an equivalent to that in space. What is the space version of alchemy? And it's do you have a lab on your ship maybe? Where I'm just thinking possibilities. Maybe a lab where you can experiment with
science rather than alchemy where you're building actual like stims and.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I have a bit of a question for everyone here about Starfield, or like their assumptions about it. Do you think you're going to be locked to playing a human?
Yes.
Yeah.
Damn, that's really disappointing.
I disagree. I don't think so.
I think so.
It's really hard to say because we don't even know the nature of this sci-fi world. For all we know, it could.
I think there's going to be a lot of human washing in Starfield.
Like it may not even have aliens, like
it may not.
Yeah.
That's a bold choice.
I think there's going to be a lot of human washing, like the same way there's whitewashing in a lot of modern culture. There's going to be a lot of human washing in that sci-fi setting.
I mean, Fallout doesn't let you play as a ghoul unless you mod it, so why would Starfield let you play as an alien?
I honestly think that I really do think they could, because if we look at Outer Worlds, I think that was one of the things Outer Worlds was missing, was that it was very like just humans. And I think they have an easy opportunity. When you look at Skyrim or other Elder Scrolls games, like, literally just a skin on your character. I mean, yeah, there should be more to it than just that.
Yeah, that's the thing. Even if they have aliens, are they actually going to be diverse in gameplay? Because, Elder Scrolls Morrowind and Oblivion, had some diversity, but, like, in Skyrim, your race choice was, like, almost entirely cosmetic.
There's a very slight difference.
You get, like, an ability.
Each race.
You get an ability.
They each have a racial feat and a racial passive. Like really the high elf has increased magicka regen and like 10 more mana points at start.
Yeah, but you don't have to play a high elf to play an effective mage.
Not at all.
I think this is a whole trend in the community that we're seeing.
They're removing committed choices.
Which I hate. But that's a whole topic of itself that maybe we can do next week.
And I'm really sorry, fellas, but I'm gonna have to call it there because it's almost quarter before 6.
So that was
so it was nice talking with y'all. Y'all can continue without me. I'm sure you guys are.
Here,
right
before you
somewhere.
leave, just with no explanation. Favorite Bethesda game across either franchise.
Fuck, that's a hard one. New Vegas.
All right, you can leave with my blessing.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Cheers.
See you, Louis.
So yeah, I guess same question to you guys.
Favorite Bethesda game. I mean, I feel like I can't really fairly answer that question because I feel like I'm the kind of person that nostalgia is going to win 9 times out of 10.
Whatever your answer is your answer. Like,
yeah, I mean, Fallout 3, I guess. It gave me the most of what I wanted, and I didn't even know I wanted it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of cornered here because I didn't play enough. I have to be honest. I honestly didn't play a lot of any other Bethesda game. Like other than I played Skyrim, but even then I don't think I scratched the surface of Skyrim. Whereas Fallout 3, I not only scratched the surface. I'm pretty sure I've seen at least on the good path. I didn't do a negative like an evil run or anything, so that's something I did miss. But short of that, I'm pretty sure I did every side quest and every location in Fallout 3. So like, and aside from that, I did not play enough of any other game by Bethesda to make a fair call. So I'm cornered into Fallout 3. That's my choice.
Jacob.
Well, New Vegas,
but it also should be pointed out that's not a Bethesda game.
So
technically, Louis needs another answer. So
that's true.
But I allow it because it's mine as well. Because it's a Bethesda game in regards to what I've been saying about those core mechanics and all that stuff. It is a Bethesda game through and through in that regard, and it's definitely the best of that style of game that we've ever gotten. But as for ones that Todd Howard himself put his penis on,
yes,
it's a toss-up, and nostalgia, and it's a lot of. But it's a toss-up between Morrowind and Skyrim.
Oh, over Oblivion.
Yeah, no, Oblivion's like the perfect middle child.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best way to put it.
But like, Morrowind is the best RPG they've ever made. And Skyrim is just, there's just so, like, it's just Skyrim. I love, it doesn't win in regards to, like, any of its mechanics compared to their older games, but there's a certain aesthetic, a certain atmosphere to Skyrim that just can't be denied.
It's classic. It's a classic.
Yeah,
like, that's
it was an
Skyrim
instant classic too. You know,
it's popular for a reason, and obviously my view of Skyrim is modded to shit, so that helps a lot too.
Yeah.
So if I mod Skyrim to the point where it's as close as it can be as an RPG to Morrowind, then Skyrim, just because I love the setting and the atmosphere. But I think when I was really into Morrowind, that was when I most clicked with what a Bethesda game, at least I feel, was meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, there's not the same visuals and nearly as much quality of life going on, but as far as that core principle of the idea of an open world sandbox RPG, Morrowind encapsulates that better than any other game Bethesda's made, and the only one that matches it is New Vegas.
I just point out that we kind of glossed over something really important that I'm just realizing.
We do that
now.
with I think in every podcast.
There was
one major thing we didn't bring up. So yeah, please.
We glossed over something pretty massive. I just realized we're talking about Fallout 76. I'm like, oh, at least they tried it on Fallout 76, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, they didn't.
No, they.
That's a whole.
God, that's right, eh?
There's a whole other Elder Scrolls game that we were I just didn't even
but the reason I didn't bring that up because that's not made by Bethesda Game Studios.
Oh, that's software.
It's not. No, it's ZeniMax. They have it's a completely different team on it. Todd Howard has nothing to do with that game.
I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah. Or the card game either, I guess.
Yeah, those are.
Oh yeah, a card game.
Or Elder Scrolls Blades.
Yeah. If we were having a general Bethesda company ZeniMax talk, then absolutely. But I mean, I'm sure they were consulted on it, and they obviously, but but they're not the core guys working on it.
Yeah, I can see them.
Yep. Sorry, I was just saying that before that was but it comes into my argument about at least they experimented on Fallout, not Elder Scrolls, but they technically ZeniMax did make an online Elder Scrolls game, so that has been charted territory. Mm-hmm. And that is vaguely popular, I think.
Yeah, no, it's actually considered one of the best MMOs on the market right now. But as an MMO, I think it's a little different than what 76 is, because 76 was literally just a Bethesda Games game with other people in it, whereas Elder Scrolls is an MMO in the Elder Scrolls world. And yeah, it does have a first-person combat perspective, but it doesn't play.
Yeah, I'll say it doesn't feel the same. that's for damn sure.
Yeah, there's still a lot good to it and stuff, I'm sure, but it's a lot like how the Old Republic compared to KOTOR. Again, a lot of connections, same world, similar storylines, all that stuff, but they don't play or feel the same way because of how different they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I would like to see a nice return from Bethesda. I think it's possible. It just means they really gotta fucking. I hate to say it, but they almost gotta take a safe route this time around. Make the game that people expect them to make, and ideally a good version of that.
It's hard to do that with Starfield.
Yeah, that's what it's such a difficult situation with Starfield. Where
in many ways, It kind of does open the door for them to innovate because people won't really know what to expect about Starfield. They should really
vehicles, maybe.
Yeah, vehicles. Who the hell knows?
Well,
totally new systems.
Hopefully, they'll do a similar schedule to what they did with Fallout, and we'll get a full reveal in a couple months at what would have been E3, and then we'll get a November release because at least that's what the rumors are right now that they're gearing up for Starfield to release this year.
Historically, that's a Bethesda. That's very typical.
It's exactly what they did with Fallout 4. Remember the Bethesda conference to end all conferences at E3.
Oh yeah.
They stole E3 that year, and the game came out a few months later. So
it wasn't just
this year, but they'll do the same thing, I'm sure, with Starfield.
But Bethesda also that year, holy shit! That. First of all, it's also the only time I think since then I think Bethesda's E3 conferences have been the most agonizingly terrible things I've ever seen.
They blew their load on the first one and then realized they were empty after.
Yeah, because that's something that the only time I think they really merited their own conference, and I was like, wow, everything they're showing is awesome. And then every year after, it was just we have another expansion for Elder Scrolls Online, we have another expansion for the card game, we have another mobile game, and we're going to show you a game you already know exists. And maybe tease one more, but that's it. There's just so much time taken up by things that weren't really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
for like a conference of that magnitude.
Yeah.
So but now I think the silence over the last little while is hopeful for me. It makes me hopeful because there's so much time that they've placed into Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6 that I'm hoping that their revamped engine has what it takes to really set aside Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6 as like new innovations, new generations. This is the next generation of Bethesda, not the old one that we know. Like they've really brought it up to speed. That's what they need. They need to bring it up to speed to like compete against the market.
I mean, they still need to prove they can make a game, that at least compares to The Witcher 3, which came out 6 years ago. Let alone whatever else is going on this year. So. Yeah,
or stand on its own, because Bethesda games, like Elder Scrolls, isn't. It's weird to compare against The Witcher because it doesn't do things the same way as The Witcher does it. Like it has its own style, and like it's combat and it's like dialogue isn't like as good as The Witcher independently. But also the world and its freedom of character is also that's unique to Bethesda. Like your character, you can have so many different types of characters, whereas Geralt is like on a smaller spectrum of what Geralt can be, and that is something uniquely Bethesda.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like comparing The Witcher to like Skyrim is silly, but the reason I bring it up is because unfortunately for Bethesda, like the comparisons can be made to Fallout 4 because they so clearly tried to be The Witcher 3 in a lot of ways, like right down to its main story.
They focused more on for one thing, it was a pretty similar story. If not,
almost the basic premise at least. I think after that, beyond that, the changes are pretty massive. But like the same presence. Yeah, they have the voice protagonist. To me, that perhaps more than anything else, as far as what we can see before actually getting our hands on the game, will be indicative to my hopes and the hope of the direction they're going in. How is the protagonist in Starfield? Is it going to be doubling down on what they tried to do in Fallout 4 and what Witcher does and Ghost of Tsushima and Red Dead, or is it going to do what it should do and go back to really just it's just you and you read you role play through the words and such. And
I don't think it's a death sentence if they go the Commander
Shepard. Not a death sentence, but it'll be an early indicator as to my hopes for the game. If again, especially with Starfield, again, it's kind of iffy to say, but for Elder Scrolls especially, regardless of what Starfield does, even if it does like an amazing job at the things that Fallout 4 failed at, I'd still want Elder Scrolls to be what the Elder Scrolls has always been as far as the main character.
Yeah, you can't have like a pre-written
because what are you going to do? Give the same voice to all 10 different species you can play as? Like,
that's it, exactly.
Get out of here. We ripped Cyberpunk apart for just having the same voice across 3 different life paths of the same human being. So imagine how we'll rip apart an orc that sounds like an elf, who also sound like a human.
And that's kind of the whole Tor experience, right? That's kind of the whole Tor experience, though, like when it comes to voicing characters. And like they can get away with it because it was them trying with the new MMO. But like my Sith warrior sounds exactly the same as like my human warrior. You know what I mean? Like you can make 2 of the same species, and like doesn't matter if
because
whatever.
Yeah, I mean, but again, that's also just logistics.
Yeah, it's different expectation for a different kind of game.
You have to think of the voice less indicative of the species you're playing and more indicative of the class you're playing.
Class, yeah, exactly. But once again, it's a different kind of game that isn't held to those same standards. I'm not expecting like amazingly rich storytelling in what is clearly an online MMO. In my single-player Fallout game, though, you fucking better bet your ass that I'm expecting some high-quality NPCs to make me laugh and just make me so giddy when I get to take a 12 gauge to the back of their head. And
even then, like I've started doing Knights of the Fallen Empire in Tor, and like if it's a sign of things to come, like they really nailed the storytelling, at least in that expansion.
Good.
The other ones I've done are like, okay, that's about the same as the rest of the game.
Yeah.
But the Knights expansions they're clearly going for a more structured and depth-filled story, at least from what little I've started of it. So.
Okay.
Anyways. Any closing remarks? Because I do have to go make supper.
That's a fair point. Julian, you got anything?
I just want to say, you got me thinking, Dan, about like the racist thing. I realize that how, like, I think now that is actually really important Because I'm thinking of like Andromeda or Mass Effect in general, and just like, whoa, different races creates different dynamics. Because I think one of the things I love about RPGs and Bethesda games in general are exploring lore and culture that doesn't exist or that could exist. Like like you want to learn more about it. If it's just humans, it's like, okay, well, what did the humans do when they got here? In like Outer Worlds, for example.
Yeah.
Learning about what happened on this on certain planets, or how the lore of companies taking over and a capitalist nightmare, which is awesome. But I'd love to see variety, right? So maybe that's the story for humans in Starfield, for example. Or maybe there's also other alien races who can criticize humans from an outside perspective, or you learn about different races. You could play as other races and then have a different start to your game. You start on a different planet, depending on... It could just lead to the same plot, but as long as, like, you know, there's a lot of potential there for different things that we haven't seen in Fallout or in Elder Scrolls. And I think that that's super exciting, and I think it's an easy thing for them to just capitalize on, to make their game more distinct from others.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a lot of potential. Yeah, that's all. That's my closing comment.
Yeah, because I feel it's pretty fair to say that, like, okay, Fallout can get away with it because of, like, you know, humans and whatnot, but even that, it's about more than humans. There's ghouls, there's robots, there's fucking super mutants, there's all kinds of other shenanigans. But I feel like the Elder Scrolls wouldn't be nearly as popular, and subsequently Bethesda, if it were just a story about humans. The fact that there are these other races, and like, albeit in the earlier games it mattered more, but even in Skyrim, you know, there are some nice little teensy lines of dialogue here and there.
Yeah, there's still distinction.
Make you feel different.
Yeah,
and I feel like
from a gameplay perspective, there's nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like, especially with taking on a new IP and setting it in space, they would be doing themselves a huge disservice and probably losing a big chunk of like their consumer base if they don't include multiple races. And ideally, make them matter. Make your race choice matter. You know, I know it's a little bit of a controversial thing to talk about, especially nowadays. You know, but I mean,
can't imply that different species are better at different things than other.
No,
species.
that would be obscene. I mean, like, species, sure, okay, you know, race, like, sure, humans are humans, but like, species-wise, like, a Krogan will be stronger than a human, no matter what you tell me.
Yeah, it's like if you made it so it said like, oh, black people are better and worse than white people. Yeah, obviously you're like, okay, you're gonna cause some serious problems. But if you're putting like a made-up race that doesn't clearly mimic a human race, I don't think you'll have any huge problems, because I think that was a problem that I think some Mass Effect races had. If it mimics too closely a human race or a human's let's say human species. I'm just trying to think of like what's like different ethnicities.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Cultures, both. It's either an ethnicity or a culture. If you mimic an ethnicity or culture too hard, then you open the door for potential criticisms based off that. But if you make up like Turians are based off of birds, for example. Yeah. So like, yeah, their culture isn't based off of anything particularly human. So you're a bit safer with that than you are of, let's say, you know, in Elder Scrolls, like they have black people called a different thing, and I feel like that opens up possibilities.
Oh, the Red Guard, yeah, exactly.
Red Guard, yeah. So like that, like you start to open up potential for you're on thin ice. Like you could
exactly. You're stepping on a pretty fucking thin line there for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I'd like to say I have faith. I'm keeping an eye on it, and that's the best that I can do. I feel like they'd be really smart if they just basically said nothing until like maybe a month before release. Don't build the hype train. You saw how much that screwed you in the past, you know?
It's hard not to, though, man.
It is, yeah.
Like Elder Scrolls 6, no matter what they do, even if they don't even advertise it, just the fact that it exists is its own hype train. Like,
no, they've already screwed themselves in that sense.
Can't stop that.
Yeah,
there was nothing they could do about that.
Here's a tiny little trailer with the words Elder Scrolls on it. That's it. That's the nail in the coffin right there. People are gonna have expectations.
Yeah.
Elden Ring. Just say it exists.
Oh man, yeah.
Everyone's hyped. It's so hard.
Give it to me now.
I'll wait for more for that. I mean, like, I've never been disappointed with From Software.
Yeah.
So I don't see that starting now.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll know more soon. But I think we'll at least wrap up the podcast now. I'm gonna stop my stream.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I think.
God damn.
It turned into a bit more of a Fallout cast than an overall Bethesda cast.
I mean, full disclosure, it turned into a bit of a Louis versus Jacob cast at a certain point.
True.
But, you know, I mean, if nothing else, it just shows that you're passionate about the thing you're talking
about. If we're yelling over each other, that means you guys can 100% come in and yell over us. Like, if you're just sitting there, like if you're feeling like you don't have an opening, just make one. I don't give a shit.
I wasn't as angry or passionate about anything, so I was like, okay, like
get your emotions going then.
And I mean, hey, to be fair, you did touch on a lot of the subjects that I wanted to touch on anyway. Yeah. So it's like, okay, I'll bring up this, and then Louis brought the whole thing up. Okay, I guess I'll let him keep going. But but yeah, no. Once again.